Thank you all for being here. Much appreciated. We are going to do our small council, which we do Saturdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you watch us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. And consider becoming a YouTube member, hitting that join button, supporting the channel that way. If you will enjoy having this content coming to you daily, consider helping out the channel. We really do appreciate it. Okay, I am going to introduce all these amazing individuals. Super psyched. We have, first of all, stranger to no one, right? An everyman. We have Wick, Doubt the Certainty, back with us again. How are you, buddy?
Doing well, actually. I'm glad to be here. It should be fun. It's been a while since I've gotten into an economics discussion, so I may be a little rusty, but I'm gonna give it my all. So here we go.
And even at your best, and you're gonna be destroyed. It's like it makes no difference. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Next, we have Professor Meat, which I don't think has been part of our closed panels before. But
No, not yet.
yeah, all right. Well,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, very excited. How are you today, Professor Meat?
My answer is always the same. I wake up on a rocket ship of euphoria and come crashing back down at the end of the day where I get knocked out and wait to wake up the next day and start all over again. I'm fantastic. I can't help it. I'm a victim of pure ecstatic joy at all times.
Understood. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Next, another person who's first to our closed panel, we have Cricket Style J. Cricket, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Prime. How are you?
Fine. Yeah, it's very nice to have you here. How was your day?
Uneventful.
Oh,
So that's probably a good thing. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Next, we have my man, LSP, slash whatever the fuck he's naming himself today. I don't know. I don't really care. But LSP is here again. LSP, thank you for stopping by. And thank you for never changing this camera. That has a perfect view of your scalp. LSP, how you doing, buddy?
Hi. Should I like plug myself or something?
Like, did you not listen to anything that just happened? Right? Like, we just had
I
like
think there were some verbs in there.
kind banter with people, and then you were, I don't know what to do. You're at the end of the line here, and I hadn't caught on to the pattern.
Uh, Listen here, libtards. Prime called me in to keep you in your place. If I see any of that sissy shit, that blue-haired feminism, that cringe-ass critical race neo-Marxist theory, I'm gonna put you in your place.
Damn right. Thank you so much, buddy. Next we have Corey, who is also brand new to this channel, but is well known to our good friend Katie. Corey, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for being a part of this. Tell a lot about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Corey Campbell. Thank you so much, Prime, for having me on. Very grateful. I'm a new Twitch streamer. I do a bunch of things, mostly politics, the occasional workout stream. I try to promote wellness. And yeah, excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. All right, let's get started. The topic for today is: should we reconsider, or should we consider an economic system such as communism that has had disastrous results, or focus on mitigating late-stage capitalism? Yeah, so it's pretty simple. We've done this debate. We haven't done it here in actually a long time. We haven't done this in like quite a while, actually. But yeah, communism versus capitalism, and I guess talking about like should we like consider a path that has, well, I think both paths have mixed results, right? Both paths have very mixed results, and should we even bother weighing one for the other, or just stay the course? So we'll go to Wick for opening statements.
Okay, so I recognize that capitalism, especially late stage capitalism, has a myriad of problems that have caused a lot of things to go wrong. We have a lot of poverty, a wealth imbalance, a lot of perverse incentives in with corporations and things to bust up unions, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot more than I could have time to list right now. That said, that's the economic system we have in place. and it is better to reform and to put safety rails and common sense measures in place to help guide capitalism, help guide the profit incentive, harness the energy of that. That to me makes much more sense than switching to communism. That kind of change would take some sort of kind of like almost a revolution in how we market things and how we act and how we do. It's just not politically viable. It's not a feasible way to go about things. And so for my money, I'm going to stick with capitalism. It's not perfect, but it's the best we got, gang. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to Professor Meat.
Yeah, so I really like the way you phrased the question, because you phrased it, you asked, if I'm not mistaken, should we even weigh one over the other? And I think that sort of gets at the linchpin of how I feel about these things. Because a lot of the times when we start to frame these ideas as exclusionary to each other, at the exclusion of each other, or like when we levy criticisms at one of these ideologies in particular, it very often, particularly capitalism, it seems to me, and socialism, they seem to have a misattribution of responsibility for certain things in our society, and I think a lot of that comes from the way we try to define these things. And so ultimately, I would say this is a roundabout and long-winded way of saying no. I don't think we necessarily should when it comes to the directions of socialism and capitalism, but I think communism in particular fits a very if we're going to talk about communism in particular, if it's in a very special category where it seems to, much like anarchy, seem to sit in this area of almost just asking too much. And if the only way to properly define it requires some type of utopian society that would fix the flaw of government in general. That's sort of my thoughts on the matter.
Cricket, please.
Okay, I want to live in a society where our economy facilitates health, happiness, and peace. I don't want to live in a society that sacrifices health, happiness, and peace to facilitate the economy. I don't object to the existence of capitalism, but I do object to the centrality of capitalism to our value system. And in the abstract, I don't believe that there is a best economic system that can apply everywhere at every time. But I think the best evidence we have from modern industrialized societies is that they do best with mixed economies. I'm a reformist, I'm not a revolutionary, and I believe the right direction to take is to recenter our priorities on basic human values.
LSP.
Was that Wick that went first? Who went first?
I went first, yes.
I think I pretty much agreed with what you said. I think there is an empirical basis to say that the best system for producing the most wealth and the best human rights flourishment is the one we have now. Prime and I had a great conversation earlier where he pushed back on the exploitative nature of it that is worth thinking about. So this is a point to accede outright, but as far as like human rights go and human prosperity goes, no time in history has mankind ever been as wealthy, as happy, secure, or as free as they are today. And if we just continue the methods of liberalism as a practice, liberalizing economies and liberalizing governments, I think we easily make the world a much better place.
Finally, Corey.
Yeah. So, as a scientist, I'm explicitly anti-capitalist. Given the choice between capitalism and communism, I would definitely pick communism over capitalism. We pay a heavy, heavy price given the capitalist system. And especially, again, as a scientist, capitalism has essentially destroyed or is destroying science. And given the fact that now, more than ever, we need science, specifically good science, to solve global problems, moving away from a capitalist system is now more necessary than ever. And also, I'm curious as to the type of empirical evidence that you say that we are now happier than ever, more flourishing than ever, given the fact that mental health issues are pretty much at an all-time high in Western nations, given that deaths of despair are highest in the US in the longest time, given all the other societal and other contributing factors, it's clear that capitalism is not working.
So can I ask a question, Corey? Because I'm not sure. So you said capitalism is destroying science. Can you expound on that for me?
Absolutely. In terms of intellectual property, in terms of innovation, in terms of increasing drug prices, among a wealth of other factors, capitalism is destroying science.
So like rising drug prices, I don't think that we could say that that's destroying society. It's a problem. I would agree with you that obviously there are with healthcare in particular, capitalism doesn't. It seems to be having a lot of issues when it comes to caring for
Okay.
people in America. But when we talk about science, I would say the exact opposite. I think that the capitalist profit incentives drives innovation. It drives producing better, quicker, easier things like that. Now there are problems with that too. I will agree with you on that. That it often comes at the cost of human suffering. But again, like to me, and from what I have seen, the profit incentive specifically has driven a lot of what we've done. Not all of it, obviously, but a lot. Thank you.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Of course, sure.
In terms of, so what makes you say that capitalism promotes innovation?
Well, it allows and incentivizes.
And also, may I ask, I would assume, therefore, given a capitalist and you are, for the free exchange of ideas, I'm assuming you are against intellectual property rights.
Oh, me and Cricket have had this discussion. I'm for reforming it. I think the way that the patent system works now is terrible. But the concept of intellectual property in and of itself, I think, is probably a good thing. The way we handle it now, probably, not probably, it is pretty shit. But I think conceptually, the ability to own your idea and to promote that idea incentivizes someone from coming up with the best ideas.
So I think your let's say attitude and belief is understandable, given the fact that I don't know for sure, but I don't know your experience in science. But as someone who is deeply entrenched in science, is in academia, and also works for a biotech startup, it is absolutely clear the intellectual property rights definitely stifle innovation. We see that in the drug market, especially when it comes to the new class of drugs, such as biologics. Companies such as AbbVie spend billions of dollars protecting their patents, billions of dollars coming up with new formulations that have absolutely no therapeutic benefits, but are just new formulations on the same thing because they can patent it again.
Can I
This is
also-
the
And if
misattribution
someone
of
else wants
harm
to
that-
improve on it, they're not allowed to.
Well, yeah, I already admitted to you that the patent system is shit. Like, I do not like how the patent. So,
And we can agree on that. And
I'll
for
be
that,
the only one
for
who
that
has
reason, we
that's
can
it.
probably imagine a society that's not fundamentally no longer capitalist or socialist in a way that ours currently is, that we wouldn't have to change our society to allow for a revised patent system. And I think generally speaking, we agree to that. And it's for reasons like that that I think that,
Well,
again,
then you're
this is
not
sort
a
of a
capitalist.
misattribution of harm.
You-
Hold on. So what is the definition of capitalist? Is it my position on IP law, on reforming IP law? Because I would not abolish it.
In terms of free markets, in terms of capital and free exchange of ideas, and the ownership of means of production, there's an inherent contradiction there that you don't want to grapple with.
There's some tension there because I believe in mixed markets. But the thing is, if your definition of being as explicitly, and this is what I mean when I say the problems of exclusionary definitions, if your definition of being anti-capitalist or of not being capitalist is to limit the freedom and have some regulation on the freedom of ideas and the freedom of the market in that case, then we're already not capitalist, and we've already won. We've done it. We've already achieved the socialist revolution. But I don't think that qualitatively anyone here would agree to that.
Could you
yeah.
could you repeat that? Like, what don't you think someone would disagree with?
That qualitatively, basically, even though we lived in a mixed market and we already have regulations on the freedoms and the freedom of ideas and marketplaces, and we already have mixed economies in that sense, given that, I don't think it's fair to give this exclusionary definition to capitalism, where, like, if you are for mixed markets and for some regulation on freedoms, that you're then anti-capitalist. This is why I think that these definitions are only useful as directionalities. When we start to use them in a way where we say, oh, well, that's anti-capitalist, or that's explicitly not capitalist just because you're advocating for some regulation, then all of a sudden the utility of these definitions start to break down, because no one thinks that we have already achieved socialism. Unless we all want to agree to that right here. Do we all?
Well, unless you're one of those far right conservatives, they'll be like, oh, we're all socialists now, boys. Oh, you wanna regulate? You want the Food and Drug Administration to exist? You're a socialist. You know what I mean? So there are those crazies out there.
Maybe this is a bridge that I can build with those people. Maybe I can start here.
Even that, I will approach it from a different angle. For any political or social system, for it to sustain itself, you have to engage in certain behaviors. For example, whatever democracy, what's the minimum behavior that people need to engage in for a democracy to function? Probably voting. I think is a fair assessment. So now, in terms of capitalism, what do you think is the minimum behavior that people need to engage in to sustain a capitalist society?
So this is exactly the problem of definition that I'm talking about, because I don't think the definitions are useful when you start to describe a society as like a socialist society versus a capitalist society. You can legislate directionally capitalistically or social towards capitalistic policies or particular socialistic policies if you want to describe them that way, in the same way that you can say we're legislating to the right or to the left of center. But it's the same problem when people try to say that, oh well, this is a leftist society, or this is a liberal society, and this is a conservative society. Things are only more or less conservative or liberal. Things are only more or less capitalist or socialist. You can't start to differentiate between like some kind of tenable definition of a strictly capitalist or socialist society, because these things just don't exist.
So can I ask?
Okay. Well, go ahead, Wick.
Okay, yeah, I just want to ask a question for you, Corey. So I'm addressing you, and you can address us both, maybe. To what, other than patent laws and other than IP, what would you say is the most harm that capitalism does in your mind? Like, what is the greatest harm? What mechanisms of capitalism are causing you to be anti-capitalist, in your own description?
Yeah, absolutely. It's based off of the fundamental principles of capitalism, if we can agree upon those, in terms of rational self-interest, and given that as sort of the guiding force in principle of capitalism, assuming that that's, human nature, which I would argue against, that tends to promote materialistic values. It tends to promote consumerism. It tends to promote overconsumption. We are seeing that now. There's a reason why, as Western nations develop economically, that birth rates go down. There is a correlation between materialistic values, consumerism, and a bunch of other correlates of societal outcomes that are negative. Mental health issues, divorce rates, etc., etc.
Do you ever think that self-interest can be a good thing? That self-interest can cause positive effects?
Well, it depends on the scale in which you want to determine that. But yes, absolutely, there are moments where, self-preservation comes into play, and it's a good thing.
So I guess my argument would be that I think that self-interest is probably the most powerful force. Motivated self-interest is something that everyone, to some degree, has, and everyone, to some degree, engages in. And I think capitalism, in its ideal state, harnesses that to bring about good things for the community as a whole, because you want a solid, healthy community so that you can prosper. This does have problems that I recognize. That's why I am for limited capitalism, regulated capitalism, rules of the road, good seatbelts and airbags. But I do not think that we could take that away and switch to a system that does not rely on this. I just think it would be worse overall. And I think history has shown that, at least modern history.
In particular, I'd like to push back against the claim that we can attribute, not to get back to it. Well, I would actually. I think this is misattribution of blame on capitalism for this mental health crisis.
No,
because this is
that's not understanding the evidence.
It's a global unless that's not what you're saying, but there's a global mental health crisis right now. I think you could way more reasonably attribute it to like the internet or globalization or the accessibility of vast amounts of like communication across the internet. Basically, you could much more easily and much more probably accurately attribute that blame to the internet. But I don't think we're going to say that the internet is capitalism, right?
Okay, so given where we have good data, and I think it's fair to say that developed countries that are largely capitalistic in nature is where we have good data. And again, I'm linking this to other metrics, not just mental health issues. But there's a reason why, divorce rates and people establishing connections is more difficult than ever. Yes, there's some data supporting, social media, etc. But there are many other societal and attributing factors built into the capitalist system that promote consumerism, that promote materialistic values. Materialistic values are correlated with many other negative outcomes not good for society. That
So-
is
So
empirically
agree with
based.
all-
Elaborate on
I
what
want
you
to
mean by
hear
consumerist
from.
values.
Okay, we'll go to LSP, and then Cricket. I want to make some space for you to talk as well. And also, we got a hype train going on. Maybe how about the hype train? Subs to channel, get bits or give subs. Help us out. First of the month, so you could be literally at the top of the leaderboard. So I very much appreciate the help. Thank you, LSP.
Yeah, I just want you to elaborate on what you mean by consumerist values. Like, which consumerist values are you talking about specifically, and why is that making us depressed? Like, I'm trying to link what you're describing with capitalism, this
Sure.
mental health crisis. And
Okay.
I feel like the connection so far is specious.
Yeah, which I can understand because it's if you don't look at the evidence, it's hard to establish links. But so why do you think people typically engage in consumerism? What do you think is a motivating factor? Do you think just more and more stuff actually leads to well-being and happiness? Because we have data showing
Do I think
that not to be the
just
case.
that? No, but do I think having that will? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not
Yeah,
an
the happiest
empirically
people are people
sound
who have,
conclusion.
No, it is. It's called Maslow's laws of hierarchy. I'm sorry, Maslow's hierarchy of
Hierarchy
needs,
of
right?
needs? Yeah,
Yeah,
but so
the ability to satisfy baser consumer demands is intrinsically linked to self-fulfillment.
baser, yeah. I agree with you. For survival needs, absolutely, material conditions matter, of course. But then after a certain point, what drives luxurious lifestyles? What makes someone choose, okay, a luxury car versus, I don't know, a Toyota Prius? What's the deciding factor for that?
I don't know what.
It's typically, if you look into the data, self-esteem or contingent self-esteem, as in people who espouse materialistic values that want to boost their self-esteem tend to engage in consumers' behavior for luxury goods. And this
Right,
you
hang on.
and you can extrapolate this to marketing tactics.
I'm not
Why
sure
do
I
you think
understand
many
you.
marketing tactics sort of prey on
Yeah.
people's insecurities?
I'm not sure I understand you. You're saying people buy nice things to boost their self-esteem?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Or to boost their status.
So to demonstrate that you could attribute this accurately to capitalism and capitalist societies, you would have to demonstrate that there are strictly non-capitalistic societies that are where this problem is solved.
Well,
And I
I'm
don't
just
see how you
wondering,
could possibly
in a
do that.
non-capitalist society, are people not going to want luxury cars or luxury goods? I don't understand.
Actually, so people with not contingent self-esteem, actually, true self-esteem that's not fragile, actually tend to espouse less materialistic values. They actually tend to engage less in consumerism. I could even give you a specific example of the type of people that we have now in society that actually practice those things.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
but I just don't see the connection between capitalism and I would consider myself non-materialistic in nature.
Okay,
I
so
don't engage in
if you're
overconsumption, but I live in a capitalist society. I support a capitalist society, so I don't see the connection between these
So
things.
behaviors and beliefs that we have tend to be correlated and cluster. Obviously, it's not universal, and there's always exceptions in human nature. But just to give you an example, okay, if you encounter someone, maybe someone on this panel, that says, "Hey, I follow a plant-based vegetarian or vegan diet," where would you place them on the political spectrum?
That
The
isn't
garbage
enough
can. That's where I
information.
place them.
That isn't enough
Where?
information.
If you were a betting person, where would you place them
They're
on the political
probably
spectrum?
more progressive, probably.
Right,
But
so why
I
is
wouldn't
that?
make that bet because that would be insufficient information for me, right?
I know,
Like,
but I'm just saying, if you were taking a bet, why would you do that? Why would you place that bet?
because most of the leftists I've met are vegan, or not. Most of the vegans I've met are leftists. Sorry.
And is that a
so
coincidence?
It might be. I haven't met a lot. That I don't
Well,
have enough. What I'm telling you is I would not have a large enough data set to make any meaningful statistical conclusion. So I would
do.
refrain from
I
doing
do.
that.
I want to
Maybe you
hone in
do,
on this
but you were
material.
asking me, so I said no.
I want to hone in on this materialism definition because again, if you're going to attribute materialism to capitalism, or is that our conception of it, then in this case it sounds more like capitalism is like this directional ideology for a person, which fair enough under that definition. But even then, I think that this mixed market is much more preferable to some kind of pure ideological conception because even under the definition of capitalism as just materialistic values, I don't think any of us, I would certainly explicitly not advocate for anyone to be fundamentally non-materialistic. I think that would be a bad prescription for the reality that we live in.
Hey, let's let Corey give it a shot, please.
Yeah. So I can.
No, sorry,
explain...
I'm sorry. Cricket, the other
Go
C
ahead,
word.
Cricket.
Cricket,
Okay.
please.
I'm about halfway on board with what the stuff that Corey's saying. I think he's right to attribute a lot of problems to materialistic values and consumerism. I'm just not convinced that communism is the answer.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that communism is, but I was like faced with a dichotomy. So
there's no reason to think that consumerism or like this need to satisfy your own self-esteem with luxury goods. There's no reason to think that one.
There is actually every reason. There is a wealth of scientific psychological research backing that up. Okay, so let's take the largest
Can you give me the psychological research that backs up under communism there's not going to be consumerism? Like, what do you mean by that? Or the self-esteem thing? Like, can you give me that empirical research?
Yeah, absolutely. I will link that.
So, and also another question, even if that is true, let's stipulate that it is, that under communism this will disappear. I would argue that communism comes with greater problems, that it would cause more harm than the harm it would solve. The cure would be worse than the disease, because we've seen how communism has generally worked out, and it just hasn't overall. There are exceptions, Zapatistas and things like that you could point to, but in most cases, it just hasn't worked historically.
If you're going to, because I just want to add to this, I have to push back against this. I don't have like case studies on hand of capitalism, socialism, and mental health, but I think that overall, I think the strongest argument you could make for mental health being solved evidence-based by communism would be some weird argument where you're trying to say that like the millions and millions of people that tend to die off of starvation under communist societies somehow like decrease the amount of mental health in the society.
And there's nobody starving or going hungry under capitalism?
Oh, there absolutely
is, but this is the attribution
there
of value.
There are no suicides occurring in the United States?
Because these are aspects of being human in our reality. So you can't necessarily just attribute them to capitalism or communism.
There will always be humans.
Yeah, that's why I posed the question of what is the minimum behavior to sustain capitalism? What is the minimum behavior that one needs to engage in to promote or perpetuate that system?
Which is why I said that there's a problem of definition, because there is none, because there is no such thing as
capitalism is based on nothing. Like, you're just not contributing. Like, so what is it based on?
The whole premise of the conversation that Prime asked, part of the questions that Prime asked, was, is it even useful to ascribe value to these things one way or the other necessarily? And so that is my whole point. As I said earlier, no, because you can't give a consistent definition for a capitalist society versus a socialist society. If you're going to treat it as a capitalist society, something that is explicitly not a socialist society, I don't know what that means. It hasn't existed. So
let's let Corey answer this. So what would you say, Corey, would be the minimum activity needed to sustain a capitalist? Just so I can understand where you're coming from and try to communicate with
that's why I brought in materialistic values and consumption, consumer goods, the consumption of consumer products and goods. That is the typically bare minimum behavior required to sustain it. That's why, again, it is correlated to materialistic values. We can take the largest political streamer on Twitch. Do you think they engage in any sort of materialistic consumption, or do they espouse materialistic values? What do you think?
What are you talking about, Hassan specifically? Like, yes, he does.
I agree with you.
Is there any society that has succeeded in any way that has not, in some extent, relied upon some materialistic values to function?
Succeeded is doing a lot of work.
All right, sure. Not starved.
We're only going to know that capitalism succeeds when the U.S. fails. Like every society typically has its beginning and end.
I'll redefine it as hasn't failed quickly and disastrously.
I mean, every society eventually fails, right? So I don't even know if this is a good metric to decide what
quickly and disastrously. Quickly and disastrously. I think every time I've ever heard of a definition of a communistic society, they've either quickly evolved out of a communistic society, immediately failed, or were very evidently bad for a long time, or did not fit the definition of communism. That's why I would ask for an example in that case.
I think Oh,
So
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Like, okay, I kind of want to move this conversation forward to like, how do these systems serve their people and their society? And I think you're definitely moving there, Corey. Talking about people's happiness, but I guess economically. So I mean, I'm of the stance that capitalism equal bad, right? But the reason
Stalin, eh?
the
Capitalism is bad. Subscribe to Prime, guys. Give them bits. Give them like,
exactly. Oh, you know what? Shut up. But
This channel is a command economy.
yeah.
Yeah, when we say this is more directionally socialist or directionally capitalist.
So like I guess so I'm always concerned about like the people that are left behind. So I had a conversation with LSP earlier, and I was talking about those who don't bathe in the riches that capitalism rains down on us, and that's very few people. Very few people actually enjoy capitalism, right? Are capitalists, right? Very few people owns the means of production, right? Who are part of that class, and everyone else, they support capitalism, but they're like not actually capitalists because they don't own anything really, right? They're just worker bees. But they are enjoying enough of the benefits that they're like, okay, well, this is good, right? Like my life is all right. I'm not living in poverty, great. But the people who are living in poverty, right? They're on the other end of this, right? Both within Western nations and then certainly in other nations around the world, right? That capitalism, it's not even leaves them behind; it comes for them, and it's very exploitative, and it brutalizes them and their societies. So, like, communism doesn't have the best track record, but I feel like so many people aren't taking that into account when they look at capitalism, right? The people who are left behind, the people who are suffering.
So
Yeah,
I can
this
speak
is-
very
I want
specifically
to
to
agree
that.
with you real quick, Prime. I want to agree with you real quick that yes, we do not take into account a lot of the suffering that capitalism causes, and these profit incentives is a powerful force. It's neither good nor evil. It's powerful, and it left unchecked, and it can wreck and it can brutalize, as you said, people. And there are people living in poverty under this system. That said, I do not think that that would be different under communism, and in fact, I think it would be worse under communism. I think that yes, capitalism has its failings, but we can shore them up with common sense regulations, common sense social safety nets, and things like that. Corey mentioned Death of Despair earlier, and that's a great segue, I guess, because I've read the book recently called Death of Despair and the Future of Capitalism in the Modern Society, or something like that. And it goes through how automation and how lack of social safety nets has, especially in Appalachia, has caused massive increases in suicide, massive increases in unhappiness. The way our education system works is failing and breaking down. That said, again, we can fix these without undermining the entire capital. We can fix these without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We can fix these problems without getting rid of capitalism, because I think at its core, capitalism, ideally, regulated capitalism is probably the best we got so far. The best I've heard of it.
It is fundamentally opposed to human nature. People have a sense of fairness for a reason. People have empathy for a reason. And again, if you to promote and perpetuate a capitalist system, again, you are generally espousing materialistic values. You are promoting consumerism. Do you think consumerism contributes to global warming and all the environmental degradation that we're seeing? Like, yes, you can regulate capitalism to the point where whatever the term is meaningless or it becomes so perverted that it's no longer capitalism. But we are clearly playing whack-a-mole to the point that none of the trends that we have talked about in terms of deaths of despair, in terms of overweight and obesity. Again, do you think that 2/3 of Americans being overweight and obese is just a coincidence? in a capitalist and materialistic society.
Honestly, it's a sign of wealth. Like, this is because we have access to food that other countries do not, right? Like, and that's kind of horrific.
Why
well,
don't they have access to
I think it's
food?
more than that.
No, again, this is
uh,
just a fundamental misunderstanding of materialistic values and consumerism.
LSP, I know you
So
have something to say, and then Professor Meat, and if Cricket wants to jump in after that.
Wait, what'd you say?
LSP, like, you got a question. Say the question.
Oh, the question I wanted to ask was, when you had brought up these places, Prime, I think you make a fair point. I have a certain luxury on the system liberalism and capitalism provide me that I can make these critiques. But these places that are left behind under capitalism today, do you think in 20, 30 years they would be left behind if they've started to liberalize? If they liberalize their markets, if they liberalize their welfare policies, if they started to liberalize free trade, if they started to liberalize civil liberties, like these places would become models based on the West. Like this is a society you would want to promote. Like there wouldn't be an issue if all of these places looked like what I just described.
Of course, it would be an issue. What? Of course, it would be an issue. like. So, Wick brought up, these places not having food. They don't have food, not because they are they're have some inefficient system, right? They're using the system that the rest of the world does, right? It's not as if these other countries just can't get their act together, right? And just don't use the proper economic system that leads to prosperity. No, these countries don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in a globalized world with an imperialistic military that imposes its will, right? Like when people did try to get funny ideas, when people did try to get.
So did Hong Kong and Singapore, right? You still see a massive growth in wealth and prosperity when they liberalized. Yeah, they were built by ugly means, but none of that means that the values I'm describing are bad.
Do they have their governments being knocked over, right? For the convenience of Western capitalism? Like, are they?
Myanmar was knocked over for the benefits of Western capitalism?
I don't know the history of Myanmar. I'm saying that African and South American countries have suffered under this. Is that their economies don't exist by themselves, and it's not a matter of simply adopting new policies, right? It's that there are powerful interests that want to exploit them, and backed by a powerful military, and so they will exploit them. If I think the thing that would make them equal, or make them that would protect them the most, is having a powerful military, right? Or being under the umbrella of some powerful military that could actually allow them to decide their own economies, right?
Of the countries in the world with power militaries that are under the umbrella of others, like Russia, China, and the United States, which umbrella would you most rather be under? Like, is the United States really creating abusive neighbors? And most of the allies of the United States tend to be the most liberal democracies.
No. Yes, they have. We have allies that are liberal democracies. Well, of course, we don't. Well, the ones who weren't liberal democracies, we crushed, right? Again, we sent in troops. We did proxy wars against those individual nations, right? And we crushed them. It's not as if we allow communism. Again,
you don't have a problem.
This is what I was saying previously. Capitalists don't like competition, right? They still don't like competition from another economic system. And so those communist country, right? When they had an idea, hey, maybe we'll run the society the way we want to, right? Maybe we'll check out this other idea. Well, that couldn't stand, right? And the capitalists used this imperialist nation to wage a global war against communism because they could not let that stand. So
yeah, I wonder if there was some sort of Red Scare that occurred at some point in history.
Exactly. So if you're saying that,
these countries were not exactly competing when there's certain measures of interventionism that I may be able to speak against, but I don't think you can necessarily assign that to capitalism. And
but they were collateral damage in the global competition over capitalism versus communism.
But is there any country who is engaged significantly in the global field of history that has not committed some kind of wrongs upon either its own people or others? I mean, like,
Yeah.
why can't I even more accurately ascribe the harm of like constantly starving their people to the largest communist
I think this is
societies?
a separate. I think this is a separate issue than the economic systems at play. I understand that it was a motivating factor and a driver, but even had we been socialist and they've been communist, I think it still would have happened because we were imperialist, which is different. Does that make sense? It's not the same as capitalist. You could be capitalist without being imperialist.
You can, but there is a tie between the two.
Historically, yes, you are correct. But
And not
again,
just
it does-
historically,
it does
but
not
like
have to.
for
There is an abstract comparison to be made upon like the idea of competition or of like acquiring resources, but but fundamentally, like we do need to recognize that to be able to extricate these things, because one of them is an economic system. Imperialism is like an ideology or something like that, or an approach to the world events. It's not a capitalist system in of itself.
Yeah, but I just want to point out, like the entire colonial mercantile system that was in place 100 years ago pretty much grew out of the not capitalism exactly, but like an economic ideology, more or less. It was people fighting for control over resources.
I would say in that case, that is a particular example of the strong historical tie between the two as it relates to certain aspects of history. But I think especially once you start to expand to the global stage, imperialism and capitalism are not like inextricably linked in a way where like capitalism inevitably leads to this 1-to-1 ratio of imperialism.
Do you think there's a correlation between capitalism and competition?
Not in
Like, do you think capitalism
and competition in
promotes or
general?
discourages competition, either between countries or between individuals?
But competition isn't necessarily
So
bad.
does communism. Like,
Absolutely,
what was
it's
the
bad.
Soviet Union?
You think?
Yeah.
No, I disagree with that entirely. Competition has a lot of good things. Friendly competition between people is fun. It's interesting.
You
It's
you
how
compete
sports
with
are.
your friends to
Yeah, I do.
hardcore to the detriment of your friends?
No, I compete.
All
well, then-
existence
like
is to the detriment of someone. There
Why
are
am I
funny, like this is an
that's a
argument against
weird
hierarchy
way to
emerging in
put it. Like
reality.
if
I
I
have no
play
idea why
if I
we're
play
doing-
fucking League of Legends with my friends, I'm gonna try to stomp them into the dust, right? But that doesn't that's competition. It's fun.
I'm sorry.
It helps us bond.
Video game where there's
completely
no
not-
material.
it's completely
Real-
pointless, like a flaccid relationship, right? Like, or a metaphor that's talking about the competition between friends. We're talking about competition between nations. We're talking
it
about
doesn't have to be
the fight for
bad.
resources, right?
Sure,
And
but
they
it
say
doesn't
friendly
have to be-
competition. This shit is never friendly. It literally never is, right? And
Yeah,
I'm
but
not saying that it would necessarily would be under communism that it'd be friendly, right? But I guess my point is for people to recognize the brutality of capitalism. That even if you think you are quote unquote winning under capitalism, right? And that can only truly be if you are capitalist, and only a very few of you in the audience are, right? But even if you are doing well under this system, like that doesn't mean everyone else is doing well. It doesn't mean that this country is doing well, right? We think of the poor, we think of other nations, right? We think of the starving African child, but we don't think of those black people within these borders also starving, right? Talking about hunger, how other nations have to experience this hunger. We experience hunger here. It was a fucking disaster during this pandemic. You remember the long lines that were happening there, right? And that was also
Because
for
of
lots of
capitalism,
reasons.
we
No, no.
still got pretty much everyone the food.
So I'm going to try to ground this again to the point of capitalism destroying science. If you want to make the argument that capitalism and competition fosters innovation in science, that is patently, for lack of a better term, incorrect. I will give you an example, okay? The real world example of the pandemic. And as a scientist, I collect data. I don't share my data with other scientists working on the same thing because we are in a race, in a competition to publish, okay? And when in reality, it would be better if I shared my data because we would both be working on the same thing for a mutually beneficial result or finding or conclusion. When it came to China and the virus, do you think it would have been in our interest if they didn't publish the genome? They said, hey, let's hang on to it. Let's develop our own vaccine and not share it with the world. Why do you think COVID research is now no longer behind a paywall? Do you think it would be a good idea if everyone was super secretive and competing in science, where you can no longer access these journals? Why do you think it was an almost overnight COVID research freely available? We need every scientist on deck, mutually cooperating to solve this global pandemic.
Oh, we did that under a capitalist system, didn't we?
With China?
What you've described is a worthy criticism of the current system, but it's not necessarily a worthy conclusion to come to that we need to.
No, it is. As a scientist, it is.
Well, let me just tell you, instead of just giving you credit for winning the debate by default by being a scientist, let me just say that I think it's definitely important to balance the dangers of what you just described against the dangers of removing the incentives that scientists have to work hard to put out qualitative results that are reflective of the quality of their research.
Yeah, they would absolutely need to be replaced with other incentives, but that can be done. It's not.
But there is
IP law is
Those
not
other
the only way.
incentives, which would be a more powerful incentive than self-interest?
No. I mean,
Truth and mutual cooperation and benefiting humanity. That's actually what scientists want to do. But I'm literally not
know.
incentivized
by the
to
way,
do
I
that.
know,
All
I
of
don't
humanity
think
to
every
just
scientist-
value truth and reality
I'm
and
going
make
to
sure
give
that
you credit.
happens. If you
I'm
could
gonna
wave that
give you
wand, I'd
credit
agree
for
with
it.
you.
I
but
think
you can't.
you might, but I do not think that the majority of scientists are all out there to do for the betterment of man. I think
No, but you
most
can have
people do things
self-interested
for themselves. You don't
can
do
have-
anything unless you get you get something out of it, right?
This
Yeah,
is where the
have
internalization of capitalistic ideas and materialistic values come into play. If you buy into the fact that, hey, every person for themselves, and me, I'm just a rationally self-interested, and I'm just, pursuing material wealth, then yes, I can see how science can become corrupt. However, if you are not indoctrinated with that ideology and you don't espouse those values, you tend to, act differently, behave differently. Again, I can use the example. Again, you're not going to see the connection, but why do you think that most vegetarians or vegans are on the political left? Is that just a coincidence? There's a
Hold on,
Okay,
sorry.
why-
I
no,
don't
no.
want to focus too much on this. On like people's placement. Like I want to focus on the economic system itself, right? Not like where people.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Can I just push back against
No,
this
just let's
veganism?
move on. Let's move on, right? Like I want to focus like on things I was talking about, right? Talking about these exploitative systems and that with capitalism, I think it's inherent. I'm honestly not sure what a globalized communist state, or not communist state, but a communist world order would look like. Would we be able to move past these issues, right? Would we be more cooperative? I can't say, honestly can't. But I can look at capitalism. I can say that the brutality is built in. Brutality is built in to capitalism. That like it simply must be the case that someone somewhere must be exploited, right? LSP and I were having a conversation earlier once again, and he mentioned that this is the normal progression of countries, right? Like you start with capitalism, and it's like really terrible for pretty much fucking everyone, right? We don't have any worker labor laws or anything like that, and you're exploited. But then you kind of just like mature into it, and things are better, right? And I made the point that we've simply exported that exploitation to other nations, right? Not even completely, but yeah, in the lower income nations, we're doing that resource extraction, right? That's where you'll find children, right, working in our factories, making our goods, right? You'll find all that there. But even then, even within the borders of the states, right? I'm not sure if all of you are American, right? True patriots. So even within our borders, like we have designed a society so the people who are suffering the most under capitalism are somewhere else, are physically separated from us, right? And so like the ghetto has its place, right? So you don't have to see just like how bad those people are suffering under this system.
So, Prime, do you think the ghetto, which does have its place under this current system, will be sustained under this current system, or do you think it will be gradually replaced with something superior?
Sustained? I think it will absolutely be sustained, unless like the people like rise, unless we have like an economic and social revolution, like to get people to actually give a shit about the ghetto, right? Like people believe that the ghetto is like a natural like fact of the world. Like it just makes sense that, you know, I mean, of course we will have some parts of a city that like it's been bombed.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think in a very capitalist and enterprising society built on liberal values, somebody's going to find a market solution to that very problem that drastically improves the lives of many. Right? I think you can make market solutions to things as we have done in the past. You can modify the market in such a way. What's that?
What? How does that? How? Like the capitalists find like they're like water in that case, right? They'll look for the easiest solution, right? And the easiest solution, right, the market solution they can provide is one that enriches their pockets, right? Not necessarily that enriches other people's pockets. And so
because that's the best way to get people motivated.
No. I'm saying those capitalists, right? They will find ways to exploit that market. So, like talking about the financial crisis, what did they do, right? Like the best capitalists, right, would be Wall Street, right? The most successful capitalists would be on Wall Street. What did they do? They went to black neighborhoods. They went to their churches, right? They talked to them. And they talked about these great mortgages that they could hand them, right? The home ownership is for you, right? Here's our market solution. Have you been left behind? Are you stuck in an apartment or some flea bag apartment? Do you really want home ownership? We have a market solution for you. We will give you these loans, right? These subprime mortgages, even if you are prime eligible, right, for a prime mortgage, right? We will specifically do that for these neighborhoods. Don't worry, we're gonna take care of you. That was their market solution, to fill their pockets and then leave them with devastation. That's what capitalists do.
You know
See,
what?
You're describing a way in which you are describing a harm in our capitalistic society. But the problem is I don't think it's fair to say that there is like a brutality built in specifically to capitalism, because it seems to me that there's brutality built in to like the universe that we're in. The at-scale problem of humanity, society at scale in a world where there are finite resources and where problems are not easy to solve. And I think that instead we should look at what seems to do a better job than other systems, as opposed to what solves all brutality, what minimizes brutality compared to other systems' ability to minimize the brutality of the world that we live in. And I think when you compare mixed market societies like somewhat capitalistic societies with liberal values to all the examples we have of communism, it seems that the brutality is diminished many orders of magnitude less in mixed market economies rather than communistic economies. They always seem to fail. I think that the best attempt you could try to justify a communistic economy would be China. And we can go through China's history if you want. But let me tell you, China's the best example that I could find in terms of today's world stage. And China is not going to support the argument that we should go to a communistic economy, even if you use the one that
you talk about brutality. Just look at what they're doing to the Uyghurs right now. Like, talk about brutality. It's horrific.
I agree.
That's not to say
that the history of the United States, like there's no.
That also they look.
Well, they're capitalists,
look,
though.
And our hands ain't free of blood, right? Like,
but they're capitalists, right?
They are now, but they were brutal before they were capitalists.
Yeah, that's
true.
Too. Like they're human. Like humans are brutal.
No, yes, but you have an economic incentive to be brutal under capitalism. It is built into the system.
Brutality is probably going to be built into every system in some way.
I can't.
Is it? No, I don't think you can say that. I don't think you can necessarily say that. I can't necessarily say otherwise. Myself, I wish I could, but I can't necessarily say otherwise. But I dream of a system that's much better than this, and I would definitely try that other system. So we've been trying to mitigate capitalism this entire time, right? Everything, all those protections, those worker protections, those unions, those regulations, right? All of that is to mitigate that brutality, right? Like that's the purpose, to rein in this monster, right? This monster that only actually works for a few individuals. Like that's the point of all that, because we know how brutal this system is, right? And then to not even consider another system to look at it. And it doesn't have to be communism. Maybe there's something better, but
it's a game of whack-a-mole.
Like, we continually consider them, but they always come up wanting compared to what we
when
have.
do we consider them? When do we consider them? What does that mean to you?
like we talk about this right now. Aren't we considering?
No, I mean like on
communism
an
versus
actual
capitalism?
a societal scale. Like when do we get a chance to consider
The
that? When
1930s, the
yeah,
1920s.
you mean are you talking about when we had a literal well is that 1930s 1920s I forget when it was, but like the literal Red Scare, right? Remember when
No,
people
that
were
was the
like,
That's the
1950s.
50s.
So the 1920s,
That was
1920s,
absolutely
1930s was
1922.
big union versus corporation time where a lot of really strong unions, socialism kind of tried to get its hand into the unions and things like that. And they were just brutally shut down by corporations and things. Like this is obviously not a good way that we have addressed this problem, but socialism has been a thing that we have considered for a very long time, and the closest like comparisons we can make are both Russia and early China, and they weren't very good, like comparatively. Like we're
Were they
bad, but they
allowed
were
to be
worse.
good?
What do you mean allowed to be good? What do you
Well,
mean?
okay, let's take the extreme example. Whatever, we can prop up Cuba as an example. Do you think there were any sort of external factors that maybe has affected their history? Like, 'cause sure, we can point to whatever Cuba as an example of communism gone wrong. But again, do you think there were any sort of external or
Of course there
extenuating
were. But
circumstances
that's with
that
any
resulted
system.
in?
Like this, we don't live in a vacuum, right? Like
Well,
no country
exactly.
exists in a vacuum, even
Well,
capitalistic ones, right?
right. When a capitalist society like the United States sees competition, they want to, prop themselves up at the expense of everyone else. That is built in to a capitalistic system. It
I
is
think that's
People
all
always
systems
have
are.
people always have an incentive to exploit other people. How are
No,
you
they
going to
don't.
fundamentally they absolutely will. What are you talking about?
No,
People will always.
that's just a testament to your character. That's all.
All right, can you describe? I'm not. Do you think I'm by saying that I'm advocating for people exploiting other people, like categorically? Do you think that's the statement that I'm making?
That's what it appears to be you're saying, as in with the proper
Okay, no.
incentives.
So let me clarify. What I am recognizing is simply the fact that there will always be material incentives, and we do live in a world where, to some extent, unfortunately, material goods matter. There are certain finite resources that we need to survive. Insofar as that's the case, you cannot necessarily make these. I'm just recognizing the fact that people have incentives, materialistic incentives, at scale to exploit people. Those incentives will exist, and I'm saying for that reason, we should regulate them in a way that mitigates the harms and the exploitation of people, and that should be the primary metric that we use to regulate what we might call capitalistic forces. However, there are also advantages to capitalistic forces that, when you remove from a society, it seems, in every experiment we run, tend to cause huge mass problems.
I would say experiment to run, or the word experiment is doing a lot of work there. I don't think it's a controlled experiment.
So how many years should we wait in the grand experiment of humanity before? How many societies should attempt to be communist before? Like, if we can't necessarily attribute, due to all the surrounding factors of all the context that they're living within, if we can't attribute any responsibility to any communist society that has ever existed because of the context of the world they live in, why can you not apply equally a criticism to capitalism, where all of a sudden, because they exist in this huge myriad complexity of a world stage, all of a sudden we cannot attribute any values to capitalism either? This seems like a false equivalency here, and it seems like best evidence would point to criticism of
hear what you're trying to say, Professor Me. And I think that's a fair criticism. I think that yes, we live in a world of limited resources, and exactly what I was saying. And that, like, I'm not so sure that within a communist world order, that we wouldn't have that competition and it wouldn't lead to certain tragedies. I guess my problem is that we don't actually take an honest accounting of capitalism and its failures, its excesses. But I was gonna say that an example. I think an interesting example is food, right? Food. Well, we say, well, this is a limited resource, but actually today, with modern technology, it really isn't. It's like we have enough food. We could produce enough food here, is my understanding, to feed the world. Right? Like literally in this nation, we could feed the world. But it gets worse, right? Let me finish this thought, and then I want to hear from Cricket. But it gets worse because yes, we could feed the world, but we actually don't have to. These other nations have managed to feed their populations for generations upon generations. And unless they're suffering from like some sort of climate change disturbance, right, there's no reason that they couldn't now, right? Like we specifically and poorer nations, rather than standing them up so that their farming economy can flourish by itself, we don't like that competition, being the capitalists, so we flood their markets with American goods, right? And we call it aid, and like their farmers literally can't compete, so we put their farmers out of business, right? Their people are suffering from starvation, because there's only so much aid that we actually give them, right? But like, and within the context of the market, you
Brian,
can't compete with
please.
nearly free. Like
Everything you're saying is triggering me.
good. Go ahead.
You're wrong on such a fundamental level. The instances of human famine have gone down dramatically since the world's markets have liberalized. We've become a globalized economy. Farms closing down because they can't compete with other like farm products. Like, you think America's an agriculture producer to that level? I mean, okay, yeah, but typically what this means is that these countries are industrializing, right? When you're moving out of agrarian labor, the next transition in your economy is that of industrialized labor. It's growing wealth. Like, these
I
are
actually
good
want to say a little bit of a silver lining to this whole world stage that we're on. The world of I actually agree in the abstract that is an interesting thing to bring up, but I actually think that because of what you've described, Prime, we are actually doing a fantastic job at I forget, there was some organization that keeps track of the world hunger, and they were saying that like they said something the equivalent, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, that we're like right at the cusp of eliminating absolute starvation in the world. Most of the places in the world now that like literally can't get food, it's literally because there are like military groups or something like that are actively preventing us from getting food to them. We've actually mostly solved a lot of the world starvation problems, except where
what you gotta say about that, Prime?
I have lots of things to say about it.
Can't get in.
I have
the capitalists can't get in.
What? No,
and there's actually a really
the
elaborate
capitalists
history.
are often funding those groups. What are you talking about? I mean, so there's some terrorist groups that have nothing to do with other nations interfering with them, right? But there are like the wars that have been fought in certain nations over resources, right? They've been fueled by Western capitalism. Like, literally the groups that are fighting are fueled by our corporations, right? And you say, well, look at that, right? The capitalists can't get in to help. No, the capitalists are already there. They're always there, right? And they're doing resource extraction. If you get in their fucking way, they will kill you. They will kill you.
We need to clarify. You are not describing liberal capitalism. Places with this kind of corruption problems are not defined as liberal capitalism. It cannot be liberal capitalism, right? These are fundamental betrayals of liberal values, right? Like, you would not consider Russia an example of like a capitalist model we want to like go after, right?
Can I just say though, I think a lot of the problem is that we have this system where, in the way that we deal with third world countries, where it's like liberal capitalism for us but not for you, right? It's like it's like you have to live under a different system than we live under, and I think if we really were just trying to have liberal capitalism around the world, it would probably be a better system than what we have today, where we instead just go around installing quasi-fascist dictatorships just because they happen to align with our national values, our specific national interests, even if they're not at all liberal capitalist.
Yeah, and I think that there's actually something to be said for the fact, again, I like to look at history and the best evidence examples we have. There's actually, like, we can look at lots of examples through history that demonstrate that like moves from communistic societies to market societies, where all of a sudden our ability to produce food was huge. That's actually what started. Again, if we're going to use China as maybe the best example of like a more communistic society that has actually persisted and has a developed economy, even if I'm going to steel man the argument with China. Well, exactly. They're not communists. So, well,
they had to transition
I'll fall back.
Starving.
They had to transition because they were starving, and we saw like it was something like over the course of 10 years there was like like an over 50% or a 60% something increase in the amount of grain that the society was able to produce. When the families that first kicked off the like revolution of markets and regional supply chains within China, there was like a 6-fold increase immediately. And everyone was so enamored with the success of these like secret conclaves where they allowed like personal responsibility of the land and just gave China a secret little a bit of the stipend that they were supposed to pay them. Everyone, the gains was so amazing that the entire country adopted it within years.
And China has many special economic zones where they allow more capitalist practices because it benefits them tremendously. The benefits to capitalism are just, it has problems. No one here is saying capitalism is problem-free. What we're saying is it is the best of the options available to us. The other options are worse.
What do we say?
I'm open to being convinced of another option. I just haven't been convinced for the positive case for a different option. If you want to just say that all these terrible things happen under capitalism, yeah, absolutely. But I think the problem is, to paraphrase something that Corey said earlier, we're paying too high a price for capitalism. We're placing it on this pedestal and sacrificing our other values to it. But we need to stop doing that. But that's a different thing than just abolishing capitalism.
And again, I would just bring it back to the fundamental principle. Like, it seems like those who are leaning more towards capitalism, like, you tend to agree that rational self-interest is sort of an intrinsic good. If that is the case, then why would you not want it unfettered? Again, why would you not abolish?
I like water, but if I drink too much, I'll drown, man. Like, obviously,
that's
good
right.
things you can have too much of.
Like, I don't think it's intrinsically good or bad.
But you're gonna drown. But the rational self-interest is a powerful force that we have to regulate, that we have to keep in check. But it is the most powerful motivator that we have found so far.
Well, as an aside, if you drink too much water and drown, you are probably drinking incorrectly. That's an aside.
Well,
So okay.
So no pure capitalistic governments.
Well,
Mixed
again,
markets,
you seem to just plant your flag of like rational self-interest is good, but then
well, I don't think we should drink no water either. I think we should drink a middle ground, reasonable amount of water, and we should regulate the amount of water we intake. To
Exactly. You should mutually cooperate to regulate your water intake, as in recognizing that you are part of a larger society. That you drinking water at the expense of someone else, not a good thing. You pursuing material, materialistic values.
Like capitalists cannot act towards a communal good. Like, they absolutely can and have.
Oh, if they can, then let it go. Take the reins off.
Who are those capitalists?
The capitalist systems. You don't believe that America?
No. You said capitalists. I meant that's one.
Okay, capitalist systems.
Okay, so
capitalist systems.
Okay.
So let's look at America, for example. Like, yes, there are huge problems, but overall, in the history of our existence, we have moved closer and closer and closer towards communal goods. The communal good, not communal goods. The communal good overall.
Yeah, but that's despite capitalists. That's despite the desires of capitalists, right? Capitalists have used the levers of power for pure exploitation, right? And then the people have continuously fought against them, right? Like the reason why we have a 40-day work week is because people fought for it and literally died for it because those capitalists weren't fucking happy about that. You dare question me? You dare challenge my ability to extract value out of you? Right? No, we will crush you. Like you try to organize the Pinkertons, like the Pinkerton organization is still around today. And Jeff Bezos used it against I think that Bessemer, Alabama, the plant there, right? That you brought in the motherfucking Pinkertons, right? Like they're still doing these things. This isn't gone. This isn't part of the past.
System, right? Because it has problems that we need to fight against. We have to. But again, I would argue that
But what are you fighting against? What are you fighting against?
The economic system we have has allowed us to prosper enough that
what do you think you're fighting against?
We're fighting against exploitation.
No. From who? Like who? Sorry. Who do you think you're fighting against?
Anyone trying to exploit us. Do you think
and who would that be?
Exploit us?
Who would that be?
In this system, because we're capitalists, it's capitalist.
Okay,
But
so
if we were communist, it would be communists trying to exploit us, right? Like people try to exploit other people.
No.
Period.
Not
People try to
necessarily.
exploit other people.
If they have
Period. Throughout
internalized
history, there has never been a time in history where people aren't trying to exploit other people, regardless of economic system, regardless of ideology, regardless of anything. People exploit other people, and we fight against that because we recognize it is wrong.
The problem is unchecked power. If any group has unchecked power, they can get away with doing terrible shit. And right now, we do live in a system where capitalists do not have enough checks on their power to stop them from doing that stuff. But in lots of other systems, you could have various other groups of people also not having enough checks on their power to stop them from doing terrible stuff.
I would even argue that for the common day man, there's probably, as best evidence as we can have, there's always going to be more incentive, not for businesses, but for the everyday man to exploit his fellow man, because there's probably going to be a scarcity of resources. Capitalism seems to be the best it seems to be best evidence case for a mixed economic society. Definitely not a pure capitalism or pure communistic or pure socialist society, whatever that would even mean. That mixed market economy seems to be the best system for distributing resources.
LSP?
Yes.
I want to hear from you.
I agree with what Wick said.
No, LSP. Come with like a thought, please. Thank you.
I walked away from my computer.
Yeah, that's fine. What are your thoughts on on anti-capitalism?
I kind of think it's dumb, personally.
A little bit more.
Okay, as a system, I think it is. I'm sure Wick said it earlier. I think empirically, it has proven its successes. It has proven that it can generate wealth. It has proven that it can generate civil liberties. It has proven it can cause humanity to prosper. I gave Sweden or Norway or one of those fucking Nordic countries, I don't remember which, like the zenith of capitalism, right? Like a robust welfare state, respect for civil liberties, right? Equal distribution of wealth. Like we're talking like that's the ideal goal. The opposite system, that of communism. When I think of every example, I can't think of a single example that hasn't been either incompetent, grossly incompetent, or just an outright dictatorship. So I mean, I don't agree on a fundamental level with the idea that the profit motive necessarily is a perverse incentive for evil. It seems it can be just as much a perverse incentive for good too, at least in the case of Western democratic countries that don't have many corruption.
Can it be? Can the profit motive itself be a? Okay, I think that's where we're. I think something we're getting stuck on.
It's underlying liberalism too.
Like,
Sorry, say that. Say it again. I didn't hear you, LSP. I asked, can the profit motive itself be a reason for good? Because some people seem to be thinking that, right? That's like they're holding. But like, could you explain that? Like, is that the case?
I would not say itself. I would say it requires an underlying culture of liberalism too. I think if you have like a pure democracy without liberalism, you kind of get those, third world shithole quasi democracies with massive corruption problems and hyper industrialization. Like that's not exactly like the ideal system. These countries have like massive corruption problems, human rights abuses, massive problems with poverty. Like this is not a system to strive for.
I would actually agree with your original question. I would disagree with him actually. That I would say, or maybe not necessarily disagree, but I would say that there is a benefit to profit incentives, at least insofar as I would say there's a benefit to individuals having there being a benefit to having individuals feel like they're like a success in life, or what benefit they can reap from their lives is like tied to some property or some gain that they like own access to, even if it's not necessarily the means of production in a wider sense, but some property and financial means that they can access that is theirs as opposed to the state's.
So let me try something here. So in my mind, like at the very base level, and I understand it's a little more nuanced than this, but at the very base level, what the profit motive and profit incentive is the better you do at something, the more you will be rewarded for it. that is my understanding of what the profit motive at its base level is. Now, obviously, it can be perverted, obviously, but I think that's a fundamentally a good value. The better you do, the more reward you get. Does anyone disagree with that as a fundamental concept?
I
I'm not
disagree
sure.
because I think it's the more effective you are at what you do, the more you'll be rewarded for it, and that includes being effective at good things, and it includes being effective at bad things.
And typically rewarded, monetarily.
I'm not sure if it's that the more effective. I disagree. I definitely disagree with that. The more effective. You don't have to be the most effective to get the most money within a capitalist system, right? Like we recognize this. That you maybe have to be the most brutal. You may have to be the most shameless. You may have to be the most exploitative, but you don't have to be the best, right? You don't have to provide the best service, right? Like people.
Oh, yeah,
If you experience like Comcast internet service, right? You don't have to be the best to be successful in capitalism. Like you just happen to be a monopoly or part of an oligopoly in which way. You have to lock opponents out of the market, right? And then you'll get the money. So I know it's the more effort you put in doesn't equal more money, right? It's being able to close off those commons, right? It's being able to take claim to those resources and then effectively exploit them for monetary value. That's how you make the profit.
Yeah, I
Sure,
don't
but
actually think we're disagreeing. Because I specifically wanted to differentiate being the most effective from being the best. Because in a way, if people are doing anti-competitive practices, driving other people out of the market, and just exploiting the market through just ruthless means, they are effective, right? They're not effective at the goals that we would want them to pursue. They're not effective in a way that betters our community, but they're effective at doing what they're trying to do. Right.
And this
Which
is why I
why
think
we
it
need
makes
those
sense.
regulations to guide it like a river. It's a powerful river that's flooding everything. So we just need to guide it, dam it up when it's necessary, and make sure that this powerful force is directed so that it is incentivized to help people rather than exploit people.
So
That is
Simply try to
you-
regulate in a direction that minimizes the harm while maximizing the
Yes,
advantage.
yes.
Because
you made-
there
so you
is
made a great
fundamentally
argument.
useful, like transcendent, useful utility to allowing the ebb and flow of supply and demand to speak for the interests of the people. There's no better metric other than that I have been able to see in humanity than a regulated form of capitalism. And if you want to say it's a regulated form of laissez-faire socialism or something like that, we don't need to get lost in the semantics, but a mixed economy, again, is like the best thing that we have. You need to allow some measure in a society for people. You're not going to get as good of results no matter what you do if you remove the direct incentive for people to own property and to some extent be able to have a private ownership of the means of production.
And you've made a great argument for the preservation of intellectual property rights, as in drug patents should never expire. I mean, to maximize the amount of profit
I would not say
and to be rewarded, like that, you would agree with that.
Which is why I advocate for a mixed market economy instead of a purely capitalistic economy.
All right, so just
I'm
a little bit of
ideologically
injustice.
not an anarchist.
But again, so then when it comes to intellectual property rights, like why is it that you like what reforms would you implement, and why are you for intellectual property rights?
So, so intellectual property rights fundamentally secure an avenue for people to be rewarded and thus incentivized to create patents, to invent, et cetera, et cetera. And Cricket can actually speak to this better than I can. He actually has experience in IP law, and he has I actually am inclined to some extent. Don't you? Or am I
I don't have a professional experience in it.
Okay, we just had a very long
interest.
conversation about it. But Cricket I actually want to say, although I hate to hand things over when people ask me questions, I would say Cricket advocates pretty strongly for why we need to reform IP law. Not that I necessarily want to pivot the conversation to that unless you guys want to, but why it is still important to preserve, because we need to have if we want
I don't think that's
effective
Cricket's take.
inventions,
Yeah,
then we need
I
to
think that's
preserve
the
the
opposite
incentive
of
for people
Cricket's
to
take.
invent.
Me. That's the opposite of Cricket's
I'm in
take.
favor of overhauling it so heavily that it's probably closer to abolishing it than reforming it.
Okay, well, me and we
You're talking about my
take
take
on
on
that.
that.
But what I'm saying, but one way or the
don't
other,
understand the heavy price that you are
can
paying
agree to
for these intellectual property rights.
Which is why I would want to reform it. But the thing that me and Cricket can agree to is that there, to some extent, right? And Cricket's welcome to disagree with me if I'm misquoting them. To some extent, there needs to be some preservation of the like market incentive of people to invent or be
The market incentive is the good. Like if it's a good.
All right, so if you can give me a version of reality and society where all humans are just good, then yeah, I would agree with you. Let's go.
It's so interesting to, whatever, the ones who are the proponents of capitalism defend intellectual property rights, any semblance of intellectual property rights, even, your mixed economy argument, because, again, intellectual property rights stifle innovation, okay? There's a reason why pharmaceutical companies, they spend billions on advertising instead of innovation because they know that their drug is protected for a decade. Just think, okay, Humira, one of the best-selling drugs of all time, billions of dollars in revenue. AbbVie knows that there's no competition for about a decade. Why do you think they spend about $2 billion a year on advertising to consumers? Why do you think they don't reinvest that in something better? Because they know another company can't come into the game and create something better because they know it's protected, okay? And there's a reason why they also spend billions of dollars in just reformulating the same thing, basically putting a fresh paint coat of paint on a new car, saying, hey, it's a new car, but there's no actual therapeutic difference. This stifled innovation. There's a human cost to this in terms of quality of life. This is what pharmaceutical companies do, all in the name and because of intellectual property rights.
And Corey, you're right, but you're so wrong at the same time. You're right that the way we currently do it is everything you said. It stifles innovation. The patent law is shit. Patents are shit the way we handle it now. But the concept of owning your idea and being able to sell your idea and to market your idea is not a bad thing. And in fact, I would argue that it is a fundamentally good idea because it would use these forces that we talked about earlier to allow us to innovate further and faster. But you're right, you correctly point out that the way we handle it today, terrible. But that doesn't mean that it cannot be done in a way that would help us more than hurt us. I think conceptually, intellectual property is a pretty good idea. And I know Cricket disagrees with me.
Yeah.
I know
again, you just don't see the cost. Again, if you actually dive into what pharmaceutical companies do, and the resulting human cost, not only in human lives, but in human well-being, there's absolutely no way you can defend intellectual property rights. Like these companies. Do
you see the benefit to having a financial incentive for people to invent effective medication? And
the financial incentive is there. Like, AbbVie doesn't.
Do you see how that could be a benefit to us as a society to some extent?
I'll take that one. I mean, like, yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to have an incentive, and I'm okay with having it be a financial self-interested incentive, but I don't think granting a monopoly is the best way to do that.
Absolutely. So we should have a mixed economy that doesn't have a 100% lean one way or the other, right? We should not abolish the incentive, but we should try to regulate it into a way that minimizes the exploitation of the companies.
But with that particular incentive, right? I want to just replace it with a completely different one. I think just the whole idea of granting somebody a monopoly as a reward for an incentive is just terrible.
But we've had this as a conversation before, Cricket. And as a writer, if I write a novel or I write a short story,
well, you and I are both writers.
I do not want it to be able to be taken by someone who has infrastructure better than mine that can publish it faster, quicker, with less typos, etc. I want to own my idea. I want to own my product. And without some form of intellectual property laws, I will not be able to do that.
Yeah, I get that you want that, but I don't think that's a good argument that it's a better system is the one that lets you get what you want.
If it lets everyone get what they want, I mean, more than other systems, it might.
No, I mean, Wick's argument for his thing is, I don't want these other people to be able to do what they want.
With the thing that I produced, yes, I do not.
Yeah. So there's no way you can construe that as everybody's getting what they want out of this.
No, but without that incentive that I can own it, like I wouldn't engage with it as much. Like,
you do realize that people were writing books and publishing things before intellectual property rights, and
certainly
still
they were getting ripped off. Like,
Can you give me an example of exactly ripped out? Like, as in,
I don't have it in my pocket. I'm
if
sorry.
you-
I
if-
could get
if-
with you later about it, but yeah, there are
I think
I
examples.
mean,
were
like
getting
every
ripped
human
off.
society in history has had artists and writers and musicians and stuff, and most of them, up until a couple hundred years ago, did not have IP law.
if
Yeah,
it's a
but
good
I-
book, okay,
And I think
it
that we
resonates
all-
with people, like artists,
Musicians
artists
are
were
losing
making a
argument if we're
living,
talking about free markets.
but
artists
before
used to-
intellectual
before
property
the
rights.
artists had patrons,
Artists-
because if they didn't have patrons, they'd fucking starve and die.
Are we gonna sit here and say that do we? I mean, maybe this is an artistic statement, but if we're gonna be talking about music in particular, I definitely think that humanity in general has like benefited from the financial incentive of people to make their own music, as opposed to outside of like the court of the government or some ruling class that like arbitrates how much money certain artists are given.
I mean,
Because
I'm
that's-
totally
that's
okay
closer
with
to-
stuff like Patreon and Kickstarter, and also with people just working for commission, and I'm also okay with performers being hired to do performances. You know, the way that stage actors and performing musicians currently make their living. I really don't have much of a problem with any of that.
We also have, I think, I would also definitely say that we benefit from the financial incentive of artists to be able to like profit off of the novelty of their music itself, or what they've.
But they were
written, or
doing
the
that
particular-
before intellectual property rights. Again, I think there's a
arguably.
long history of music and art and writing.
Yeah, the difference is instead of like all of humanity getting to decide what's good and not good and getting to decide and pay for the substantiation of music in general and the variety of music that they want, allowing better taste to flourish and more unique and interesting music to flourish as a result, I think that you get way more of that in like a open market for music compared to like literally having a ruling class that dictate who they're going to give money to, because it's just a small oligarchy of people that decide, or a government in this case, I guess, maybe, who decides who gets money for music and who does not.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm not-
anyone's in favor of like an aristocratic class deciding these things.
That's not what I'm
We
advocating
might
for
be
at all.
in favor of a so if it's not a ruling class and if it's not the government, then it's a market, right?
Yeah, but like I said, I'm okay with stuff like Kickstarter and Patreon, right?
But are you
That's
with
that's
people
not like
being
an
able to-
aristocratic ruling class
Okay, but
deciding what
without
happens.
No, that's a
intellectual
market. That's free. That's
property
a
laws,
free market.
without intellectual property laws, what
Mhm.
protection would these people have if you make a song that someone who's much more popular than you, has much more Patreon subscribers, who's much more well known, will just fucking take your song, put it on their stuff. Everyone knows of this person, so they can all buy it from there, and you will get nothing or very little. And intellectual property, one of the few good things they do, it has allowed creativity to be rewarded by the person.
I mean,
actually
it's
engaging in that
specifically
creativity.
forbids creativity
So-
in many
so-
areas.
I disagree
So
hardly,
thi-
and I
thi-
think the evidence is
this-
against you on this.
This comes back to the argument of internalizing the capitalistic values. Yes, I can see someone in a capitalistic society who is internalized, the rational self-interest, saying, hey, I can make a profit off of this guy. I can exploit this guy. And so why not do it?
I can see how you would have trouble seeing the benefits of a capitalistic society if you had internalized this strong core value of communism being the ideal. I can see how you would have trouble seeing that.
Yes, because children as young as 1 understand fairness and altruism and the equal
Communism
distribution
is
of
young
resources.
of one.
They understand
children as
selfishness
young as
before that.
kids steal-
children of all
kids
ages
steal
have
shit all
been
the time and
starving
beat
in
the
every
shit out of
communist
each other,
society that ever existed. Maybe is that okay for me at that point to have a strong ideal against communism, or would you
I
think
didn't
maybe
hear
it
all
would
of
be
what you
better to
said.
abandon? So I would say in every communistic society that has ever existed, children of all ages have starved to death in massive numbers, just about everyone at a large scale. So at that point, would it be fair to me have like a strong ideological disattachment from children starving and attribute that to communism?
So
Or would these
They-
definitions maybe useless if I try to use them in that way, as I
No,
attribute them
so
to, like
so
ideal
this
characterizations
ignores,
of
like, you
people?
are taking a very narrow view of history, at least in my opinion. So how long
Let's
has
dig into it.
humanity been around? So, or maybe we can just distill it down to what is a communistic society, generally speaking. At its base level, there's no class, there's no money, there's no hierarchy, and whatever, people own the means of production. So in terms of all of human history, without getting into biology, there's a few 100,000 years. Do you think early humanity, or let's say indigenous communities, they were more capitalistic or more communal?
the earliest communities.
Or
I
even
think
indigenous communities before
I
capitalism
think it's
came
a false
along.
dichotomy you've already described. I think that there were probably lots of societies that had varying amounts of like what we might be able to describe with capitalistic values and communal values. I don't think these things are necessarily like wholly exclusionary.
Oh, exactly. So you don't want to engage because there's about 100,000 years of human history.
Dude,
That
that
again,
history was pretty
I'm trying
brutal.
to engage. I'm trying my best to engage. You're welcome to get into
Yo,
it at any
this
time.
history was pretty brutal. We do not want to return to that, right? Like, we recognize that what we have is better than that in most ways that we can think of. Like, early history was brutal to the extreme. Like, we talk about warring factions, we talk about exploitation, slavery, things like that. That was common for the last 100,000 years, right? These humanity's always been brutal to other humans, like always.
well, between again warring factions and tribes. That's why I brought up sort of indigenous communities. Again,
Yeah, they killed the shit out of each other a lot. Like,
To bring up
between again,
indigenous communities to define a communistic society, I think that might be part of my problem with the definition.
no, as in, so on the spectrum between the two polar extremes, because unfortunately we have to work within these
Sure.
two polar extremes. Again, where would you place them more towards on that spectrum? More communal or more capitalistic?
I would have to speak to the individual society. If I were to guess on average, again, I disagree with the dichotomy. I don't agree with the dichotomy that you're drawing. I don't think it's accurate. If we're talking about communism, or it could be communal. When you say communal here, just to be clear, are you using this term specifically to refer to like a more communist-leaning society?
Yes, a more communist-leaning society. Yes.
Okay. Just communal could has a colloquial meaning that is different from necessarily being
Yeah,
attributed
that's
to
fair.
communism. So I was just trying to be clear about that. All right. So if with that clarification, I see now the question that you were asking. I would say that they would probably, I guess, if we're going to describe capitalism within some sphere as like a directionally less regulation than communism, I would say in that sense they were fundamentally probably more capitalistic.
Okay, so you think each individual was more rationally self-interested, and for the profit motive.
Well, all right. So if we're going to talk about people being financial profit motive, what do you mean? What is profit motive in a tribalistic society?
Well, yeah, that's my point.
Okay.
It probably doesn't exist, and
Okay.
therefore it's probably more on the spectrum towards communal.
They had a much more communal value system. I think is probably the point you're driving at.
Yeah, that is probably a more fair assessment. Yes.
So, okay. So in this case, are we defining communism as like having communal values?
Yes, because generally speaking, values drive behavior. Just again,
Okay, so
I
in a
point back.
colloquial
This is
sense,
like
in this case,
exactly what
communal,
I've been
right?
arguing. the
Because
whole time.
communal,
Like,
but the thing is that's the whole thing, is that's why I would argue for a mix of like more communal values with more individualistic values. That we need to, there is a benefit to materialistic, individualistic values in a society. There is, which is why I would argue for a mixed market that reflects those mixed values that are necessary to like flourish and benefit the best we can as a society and our shared reality.
Yeah,
again,
I do
just
want
don't
us to
think-
be more communal and less individualistic. I'm totally on board with that, but I don't think this requires us to abolish capitalistic markets or be communists.
I would agree with Cricket here, and again, pointing to ancient history as your examples is not helping your argument. It just is not. We have improved so much. Again, when we want to minimize brutality, it's not going back to these types of systems. It isn't, because it was terrible.
If we want to talk more history, I mean, we can look at Vietnam in 1961 when they started making the changes to more free market societies. The average, sorry, I got my dates reversed here, but the average amount of rice that they were making increased by, doing the math, about 25% over the course of about 5 years, or of about 10 years. Under Des Moines leadership, they had a huge. They were like one of the world's larger exporters of rice at the time, and when before they were starving in massive numbers. I think it was something around like 30 million people died under one of the biggest, the Maoist revolution. and which then led after, not to get too much into the nitty gritty of the history, after a series of revolutions, basically led to those families rebelling, forming secret markets out of the eye of the Chinese market, which were so hugely beneficial to the starving society that that it was adopted by that actual communist government within a few years. I mean, if we're talking human history, I mean, I don't think that's going to help you out here.
So you want to bring up Vietnam? There were no, again, extenuating or external circumstances that
Can you
affected
give me an example of a single human society ever in history that did not exist within some type of extenuating circumstances or context?
Well, that's my point. Once the value system, once the values are internalized, then it becomes down to exploiting other nation states. That's the point.
So do you so all right, so if again, this is why I say it sounds like you're advocating essentially for a like changing human like consciousness into a like totally fully communal society. And if you can get the human hive mind going, listen, I think that would be worth the experiment in of itself, but I don't know how you're going to do that. And when we live in a world where people are not going to be ideal and where there are always going to be incentives for some bad people to be bad, it's a mixed market actually yields the best results overall because humans are not a monolith and we have different value systems and we have different ways of expressing those value systems and of parsing them out into reality.
I agree.
Corey, can I just ask you a question? Because this is what it sounds like you're saying to me, and I want to make sure like if this is really what you mean, because it sounds like you're saying that when bad things happen in capitalistic societies, it's because of capitalism, and when bad things happen in communist societies, it's never because of communism. It's always extenuating circumstances. I know that's an uncharitable framing
No.
But please tell
I
me
can
what I've got
see
wrong
how it
about
can be
that.
perceived that way. Totally. And well, I can attempt to make the argument that, again, this is why I'm shying away from communism and more communal values. Because yes, expressing communal values or any society expressing communal values, well, capitalism will probably exploit that. But like that is not an uncharitable take. Like, I can see how what I'm saying is perceived that way, where nothing is attributed or nothing negative is attributed to communism. I'm not going to say that though.
I
But you can also
just
say that
think
all
how
of
we're
the
separating the two here. Like communal values is good. I would agree with you, but I
Yeah,
think
all of us are on board with
capitalism
that.
and communal values are not mutually exclusive. I do not believe that at all.
They are fundamentally opposed. Again, well, at least
I mean, we have communal values in a capitalist society we live in right now, right? Like we have a society where we value community. That's why we have taxes. That's why we have all
why
these
we're
other things.
so the more disconnected than ever. That's why feelings of loneliness are at an all-time high. It's so much communal values. That's why
not about capitalism. That's about
you
like
can't attribute that to
social
capitalism.
media.
This is a world problem.
You absolutely can.
There's a world mental health crisis. This is very disingenuous to attribute it purely to capitalism. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Corey. I mean,
keep in mind, our ability to diagnose has gotten so much better that it isn't that there's more of it; it's that we're seeing it more. It's more visible.
Corey, I halfway agree with you. I do think there is a connection between capitalism and a lot of these harms. I also think that capitalism is largely opposed to communal values, and that's fine, right? But I think we need to have some communal values and some individualistic values as well. We don't need to entirely throw out one or the other.
Well, yeah. So I'm not saying everyone must sacrifice themselves or self-sacrifice themselves for the betterment of another person.
Corey, can I just ask real quick? Do you think you might be like a little bit of an anarcho-primitivist?
I'm not planting my flag. Like I'm coming here under the how it was framed of communism versus capitalism. Given that framing, like yes, I'm going to absolutely pick communism over capitalism, but I am absolutely open to multiple alternatives as a solution. But given the framing and whatever the binary put forth to me, then yes, I would absolutely pick communism over capitalism.
It just seems like, well, I mean, when I think of like the things you like are talking about, like that you kind of want to aspire it to be unique to capitalism. Like these are good things. Like luxury goods are good things. People aspiring to have luxury goods is a good thing. It's how we improve.
Again, they're a good thing to people with low self-esteem and contingent self-worth. I linked something in the chat. I'd encourage everyone.
Return to Monkey? Like,
pardon me?
Return to Monkey? Like, we shouldn't have nice things because people are
I'm
sad.
not.
If
Again,
we want to
yeah.
convert this in a neo-primitivist argument, I'm
feel-
happy to.
Well, let's
It sounds
not
like
do that.
we're
Let's not do
going
that.
that.
Let's not do
It
that.
sounds like
I don't
that's the
think Corey- I don't
justification
think
that's
it's fair to
necessary
Corey.
for this argument.
I just don't think it's fair to Corey to say that that's his argument. I think that's a mischaracterization.
I'm not
It's either
saying
that
everyone-
or make all humans good enough to live in a communist society without starving each other.
No,
I'm just will the communist system not have any luxury goods? Like, will there not be desire for those things?
there shouldn't be, just because, again, if you have a let's say good enough amount of self-worth, you don't have a desire for these luxury goods because you're not looking to boost
Whoa,
your status.
wait,
You are not.
Do you
only
think that
reason
self-worth
anyone-
might be
Nice
partially
thing.
determined by people's
Why
experience
would I
and reality?
live in a society that purposely lowers my quality of life?
Look, it's not just about.
No, but if you had the right
it's about
values, you
comfort.
wouldn't mind, right? If
It's
you had the right
about
values, you wouldn't
comfort.
mind starving.
It's
Okay,
about
no.
comfort. So
I'm
when
not
we talk
ab-
about
so- no,
luxury
no.
goods,
Let's-
certain luxury goods can help you be more comfortable and live more comfortably. That has nothing to do with wanting materialistic values. Comfort is a human kind of thing we always want. We always want to have safety,
I
security,
agree.
comfort, things like that. And luxury goods, by definition, help us lead more luxurious lives, more comfortable lives.
It's not like
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
I'm not saying let's abolish cars or automobiles or PCs, but I think there's something like I'm also not saying that yes we need super yachts. Everyone, is that what you're saying? Can I frame it that way? Everyone just needs the Jeff Bezos super yacht.
If we
can
can
all
afford
just
everyone
go
to
on our
have a
super
super
yachts
yacht, I
in
would
the
not be
ocean.
I would not
and
be
put-
I would not
well,
be
so
opposed.
Why not?
I would not be
You
opposed to
frame it
everyone
as
having
me, the
luxury
most
goods.
uncharitable. Everyone's just dirt poor, starving. You all want the Jeff Bezos super yacht, right?
No, I want everyone,
so-
even the poor
so-
and starving, to
so
have
maybe
luxury goods. I want everyone to rise to the level of Bezos. I know that's not ever going to happen.
You
but
really want everyone to have a
ideally-
Jeff Bezos? Everyone,
Ideally, I want
8
everyone
billion
to have
people
all
in
their
the
needs
ocean
met.
on their super yachts.
I want
That's
not
what
only to have all their needs met, but I want them to be able to live a luxurious life. Ideally, I don't think that's a bad thing. Why would that be a bad thing?
you think
I know
everyone.
it can't happen.
People with super yachts.
Do you think that we're ever going to be,
Okay,
without some
so-
massive transformation of the human consciousness, be able to
this-
have a
Yeah,
society where
I hate
people
it when
don't want to
have fun,
exceed
like, that's
or
huge.
others' expectations, exceed the abilities of others, be rewarded disproportionately to other people based on their like
You
preferences
think there
and
would be
their desires?
no cost to the globe or the world if everyone is on their super yacht or everyone's driving
of
the
course
most?
Do
there
you
would be
think it's
cost, but
possible that
that's
there might be a
why
huge group
we
of
limit
people?
that shit, right?
Do you think it's possible that there might be a huge group of people across like the average of humanity that if you deprive them of their ability to like be rewarded and work harder disproportionately to other humans, that they have their own accord? And do you think that they might have like a decrease in their psychological well-being as a result, unavoidably? Do you think that's
yes.
Do you think the ability to compete and be rewarded directly for your contributions relative to other humans is maybe relevant to the fundamental human happiness? Do you think that maybe
No, there's
for a lot of
no
people
there's
that-
no reason to, so we can pick people out of society that actually live their values, that actually know how to regulate their consumption. This is why, again, people are not going to see the connection.
The rest of the people we don't pick.
Well, that's why I bring it back to the root values in terms of not adopting or internalizing materialistic or consumer values.
Okay, but those who have already done, what do we do with those people?
Yeah, they need to be dealt with. They need to understand.
Dealt with
and
how?
Yeah, they need to be put forth. I'm going to attempt to do it now because, again, the scientific evidence is there that materialistic values are detrimental. That, again, if you are adopting or internalizing the rational self-interest, it comes at a cost. You also have typically reduced empathy. You tend to espouse less altruistic values.
Yeah, but what do we do about it?
Yeah, I'm
curious,
attempting to do it on this panel.
Well,
So we just sit and talk about it? That's it? That's all we do about it?
That's typically how good ideas get spread.
No,
Along
I'm
with
also-
share.
what
I'm
then?
also spreading good
We're
ideas.
spreading
But
the
when
good
you said
ideas
that,
To
like,
what end?
like as a in at scale, there obviously that can't be the answer. So we'd have a large group of people that we'd have to deal with some way, and it can't be just sitting them all down and talking to them. So then how do we deal with them? In every instance of governments trying to deal with these groups of dissidents has never been a good thing.
Okay, so it's like
Has never
asking.
been a good thing.
It's like asking, how do you solve the obesity crisis in the United States? Okay, like it's a complicated, multifactorial. There's clearly a problem, right? 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese. just so happens to be in a capitalistic society that tends to foster consumption and consumer goods and materialistic values. Definitely
So-
no connection between those two things, even
Wait,
though
so
there's
what do
a
you say
wealth.
to the fact that Japan just has way less obesity and they're also capitalist?
Yeah, well, Japan is paying other costs as well that are not seen. Like negative outcomes can manifest in multiple different ways. Do you really think Japan is functioning optimally in terms of like?
No, absolutely. I agree. They pay other costs for capitalism, but I can't. I was kind of fighting back against this idea that capitalism is so intrinsically tied to obesity that we're just inevitably going to end up obese if we're capitalists. I mean, when we have countries in the world today that prove that that's not the case.
Well, again, this is why I bring it back to values, because yes, the ones who tend putting aside obviously starvation and famine, there's a reason why countries with different value systems tend and that don't have these materialistic values or the consumerist values. The evidence, I'd be more than happy to share the evidence that yes, again, it comes down to values and what drives behavior. And what you think will lead to happiness or well-being. Do you think people are over-consuming or overeating because they actually think that it maximizes their well-being and health? Do you think that?
No, of course not. And by the way, let me also say that earlier Wick was proposing that the explanation for the obesity crisis is just abundance of food, and I thought that's not really
It's
a good
obviously
explanation.
not the only explanation.
No, but it's necessary but not sufficient.
Corey, are you suggesting that under a communist system there's not going to be like a McDonald's?
Well, that's the thing. This is where
We would
the
make
capitalistic
sure it
societies,
doesn't exist.
prey upon
Okay,
other
Is there gonna be
countries or
like,
economies.
is there going to be like a McDonald's in a communist society or not?
I mean, I'm not going to plant my flag, but I can see, I see no reason why one can't exist fundamentally.
Wait,
And it
why
would have to
not?
be a
They're
co-op, or
exploiting
how's
people's
this working?
desire for unhealthy food.
But again, this
Okay,
comes back. This
I
comes
have
back to like
follow-up
corporations,
Follow-up
and obviously.
question. Corey, in a communist society, is there going to be laws preventing people from eating unhealthy foods?
So here's where again, people who tend to espouse different value sets don't overconsume. That's not a coincidence.
So can I ask you a question, Corey?
So
To what
so
extent
have a
would you
human race
limit-
that will
just real
never
quick,
eat
Nate, just real
McDonald's.
quick, let me ask him this question. To what extent do we limit people's abilities to make bad choices that are bad for them? To
I
what
don't think-
extent, under a communist system, do we limit people's choice to make a wrong decision that will hurt them in the long run?
I'm not necessarily in favor of legislation for that. This is why, again, you seem to be making the argument. I could be wrong. Of you make the argument that capitalism has its benefits, but you want to regulate it so much because you see how detrimental it is of playing whack-a-mole.
You could you could regulate the incentive structures, yes, without restricting freedom to a large degree.
Right.
Yeah,
and
and
if
we're
you
not going to rid ourselves of the problems, by the way. Like, I don't think anybody is saying that regulated capitalism is going to be perfect and is not still going to have a lot of terrible shit going on.
Yeah, just to be clear, you're just making an argument that people who eat like this is how insane this argument is. You're literally making the argument that people who eat McDonald's have worse value systems.
They have a different. I didn't make a judgment. I said different.
There's obviously a value system being applied here if you're advocating for one or the other.
I agree with you. So
okay, so you have a worse, or I don't know how you would define worse in this case, but to some extent you are saying that your value system is worse, and that is the reason that you eat McDonald's. That's literally what you just said.
There's multiple factors. That is one of them. They have a different value system.
I just wanted to make that clear.
As a biologist, do you think it's purely genetic and biology?
Of your value system?
Yeah. So Professor Meat, as an actual biologist, as a scientist, do you think it's strictly genetics and biology that's driving the obesity crisis?
Do you think it's at all genetics and biology?
No, I don't.
You don't think it? Okay, that's interesting. All right, I guess I'm gonna have to do research to show that people's. I haven't had to research this up, so I don't have it ready. But I guess I'll have to look enough research that shows that people's biology is related to their taste and prepreferences in food. And
I mean, couldn't you go to like Samoans or whatever? Aren't they like genetically more prone to obesity?
As someone who has taste buds and enjoys food, am I obese?
No.
No,
Did you think that's what
like
my argument
people's
relies on?
metabolisms are different. Like genetic your metabolism is based on your genetics to a large degree, is it not?
No, it's okay. Corey is
do
skinny
you-
because he's a better person than us.
Sure. Did I say that? Did I say I'm a better
No,
person?
I'm saying it. I'm having the brave
Sure.
take. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. This
Again,
is my position.
This is why I link things to values, because values is what drives behaviors. This is why, again, you don't see the connection because there's a larger picture here, okay? If you look at, for example, the demographics of vegans or vegetarians, they have greater empathy, okay? And actually, vegetarians tend to be very highly educated. And yet, despite their high education...
Please let me.
No, despite their high education...
Vegetarian's good.
Despite their high education, they actually have... tend to have a lower income comparatively. Do you know why? It's because they take jobs.
They have a better value system, apparently.
Did I say that? I didn't say that. I said a
Is
different
it because
value
of the value system? Different. Sorry, it's not better or worse. It's just different, and your
Okay.
argument relies upon a value that you're applying to one or the other. That's
Okay,
all.
so what do you think drives people?
But it's not better or worse.
What do you think drives people to make different dietary choices? What do you think is the mediating factor there?
Jesus, it's probably tons
There can't just be one. There's lots of reasons that people make the dietary choices.
There's not, but there's one primary one. It's empathy. Okay, vegans and vegetarians score higher on empathy. Okay, that is a fact. You want me to provide the evidence? I'll do it right now in the chat.
All right, but do you think that means that if people aren't vegans, that it's because specifically of a lack of empathy?
It's not the only thing, but that is a major contributor. Why do you think, again?
I think there may be a
correlation far away from capitalism,
right?
Insofar as your argument seemed to keep boiling down to, obviously, my argument betrays that I have some ingrained, like, capitalistic philosophy. I think that you might be self-reporting, just saying, you might be self-reporting as, like, having this ingrained veganism philosophy that's apparently informing your communism. I don't know, this is a little weird.
Do you think that, what are the odds that you'd find, or do you find cigarette smoking prevalence in the vegan community? Do you think that's high or low?
I'm sorry, why are we talking about fucking vegans? Like,
because vegans can never talk about anything but veganism.
Yeah, they can't help themselves.
Because vegans have a better moral system.
All carnivores too, but you know.
Because vegans are also communists.
We'd all be vegans.
And that's why they have better moral systems. That's the correlation there.
Did I say that? I'm just saying there are things that are driving this behavior. There's a reason why, in terms of the political spectrum, if you're a betting person, okay, and someone identifies themselves as a vegan or vegetarian, you probably put them on the left. There's reasons for that. There's important psychological reasons for that. Okay, and there's also no surprise that if you test liberals and
conservatives, sure, whatever. But like, not everyone under any other economic system, right? Unless, as one of you guys said, like we have laws in place to regulate that. Like, people aren't going to change, right? They aren't going to suddenly have more of this empathy and stop over consuming, right? So like, what does it have to do with whether either other economic models are viable, or that this current economic system is unviable?
Yeah, so it's because people have internalized the capitalistic ideology so heavily that they espouse, the rational self-interest so heavily that it closes them off to other economic systems. Because again,
I'm gonna meme a little here, Corey. I'm gonna meme just a little. I respect you, buddy, but this L you're taking better be vegan because you're eating it pretty hard.
Okay.
Like, I really hope this L.
That's fine. I'm not here to win. I'm not here.
For fuck's sakes, please. Okay, isn't that biased in our favor that capitalism as a system perpetuates itself? Doesn't that suggest that the people who live under this system are interested in its self-perpetuation?
Well, then you can make the argument for
communist system, right? There was mass resistance to communist systems, which is why they clamped down on civil liberties, which is why they had massacres, which is why they were aggressively imperialistic, why they were brutal people, brutal rulers. They ran like a total spy state. The quality of life is so functionally different.
I'm not disagreeing with that assessment of, the current historical narrative of communism. I'm not necessarily disputing that. I'm just, again,
saying.
I'm speaking to the values. I am absolutely speaking to the mentality that tends to be espoused by
an actual claim, like, instead of just saying things.
Well,
like, all you're saying is capitalism incentivizes things that are still gonna exist under my system, right? Like you're
I
still
think
gonna have
we had a-
McDonald's, you're still gonna have smoking, you're still gonna have no laws prohibiting people from engaging in these things. People are going to have their vices. Like you've created this utopian fantasy based on anarcho-primitivism.
I think
And
it's
if-
okay
and
to
if
say that
everyone's
capitalism
values-
feeds
Hold on,
into
let him answer. Let him answer.
Well, no, I didn't. You're well, it's probably not intentional, but I think you're attributing things to me that I don't think I said. This is why, like, it's probably difficult for you to see when I am making a values argument,
didn't
and
say
you.
it. Then let me ask: will there be McDonald's under communism?
I mean, again, fundamentally, in principle, like, this speaks to a larger conversation about corporations.
You can't answer the question.
And
It's
hate
just
it.
about our philosophy. We obviously have this inbuilt philosophy that biases us, and that will always be the answer to the question.
the question would be more asking: would anybody have the motivation to open a McDonald's in a communistic society?
I sure hope so. I love
How
burgers
are
and
you?
fries
Oh,
from
great,
McDonald's.
great. This is great. So how are you going to achieve a society in which no one wants to consume McDonald's?
Well, I don't think it's that hard. I don't consume McDonald's.
All right, so everyone should be Corey.
I
Everyone
didn't
should
say
just
that.
not want to assume. All right, so how did you achieve it? How did you achieve the value system that allowed you to not want to consume McDonald's? And do you think it had anything to do with biology that might be somewhat, or experiences that might be somewhat particular to you, or preferences that might be somewhat particular to you, and not necessarily other people? Or do you think it's just your value system?
Well, obviously, biology plays a fundamental role, because without brains, we don't exist.
Sure. So you
but
want
yes.
everyone to be biologically and like ethically equivalent to you in this utopian society.
No, did yeah, again, you are attributing things to me that I didn't say.
Okay, so then why are you not eat? Why is you not eating McDonald's a good example of your argument? Then can you explain that to me?
Well, I would say it's an argument for better health overall. That's the only argument.
All right, being
that I would say.
healthier is better. We can all agree. Now back to communism.
Yeah. So okay. So again, this is why. What do you think drives behavior? What do you think drives people to eat McDonald's?
Okay, I think
It's tasty and yummy. Like that's
Okay,
why
so-
I eat it. It's
So
tasty
what
and
you
yummy.
what
No
you're
one's
what you're
going to think
saying,
it's
Wick, is
tasty
I
and
don't
yummy.
like tasty food. So why do
No,
I?
but
Well,
I'm
you're a
saying,
vegan,
what
so-
okay, let me explain this. Let me
That's fair,
try. Let me
Prime.
try.
That's
No,
fair.
I want to seriously engage with this point. What I consider good, yummy, and tasty and valuable may not be the same as anyone else here, but that's okay. And because some people agree with me and also find yummy, yummy burgers and yummy, yummy fries to be tasty, McDonald's can and probably would exist under a capitalist system or a liberal capitalistic system, right? Because there's a market for it. And even in communism, if there's market communism or market socialism, I should say, there'd probably be McDonald's too, because it's yummy, yummy, and people like it, so it'll probably exist in one form or another.
Right.
I just, again, just because I like or value
Oh,
something
gotcha.
doesn't mean it's necessarily this kind of overarching good thing. I like and value things that may not be good, but I still do it because that's just me, right?
Yeah.
So
and-
Corey, can I extend
and-
all?
Well, let me. Can I address
Okay,
Wick's
sure,
point,
sure.
please? Sorry.
No.
So to hopefully address your point as best I can, I can make the argument. I think it's fair to. I don't know your exact age, but I would assume McDonald's precedes you being born.
How old do you think I am? I'm just curious. It's probably near here or there.
Mid-30s.
38. Close enough. Go ahead.
And so I can totally see how with an aggressive marketing campaign, how you're loving it, with a Happy Meal, that you have internalized a message that, hey, to lead a happy and fulfilling life, you need this greasy food and French fries, and this unhealthy food, under the perception that if you consume these things to a high degree, that this will lead to your maximal well-being.
That argument, though, could be made for literally everything that everyone likes and values that we have been internalized into it. This isn't like
So we should all
unique.
value the same things, and then we'll all be able to agree.
Unique
I'm not
to-
saying all value the same things, but I think there's something fundamental that we can all sort of overlap in our values and agree upon. Sure. I
All right,
think
so let me try to agree with you on something here, because I think that what I can agree with you, Corey, is that I think we can agree with. Feel free to contradict me here. Is that it would be nice if we lived. It would probably be relatively nice, I would say, if we could somehow find a way to snap our fingers, or not necessarily snap our fingers, but get to a place where everyone would prefer to eat healthier food rather than unhealthy food. However, if your argument for communism is that we could change the social narrative to an extent and people's minds to an extent that their innate desires would substantiate the communism, then it sounds like your advocacy for communism relies upon capitalism bringing it into play. So until we get to the point to where everyone in the world wants communism, well, we should start. I guess we can try to change their hearts and minds in the meantime, and on the way there, until they want it, according to you, we should just let their desires be the thing that determines what we legislate and don't legislate, like a capitalist system. Now, because your only advocation relies upon everyone already wanting it and the supply and demand of markets not being removed from society, but just all falling into place to allow communism because it's what everyone actually wants with their values.
Okay, so a quick question.
So then what's the difference between communism and capitalism? You just want people to value the things that you want them to value.
No, I'm not saying... In no way would I ever make the argument that everyone has to be exactly like me.
It's
or
close
anything
enough
of that
for the
nature.
communist revolution.
Or that I am perfect. Far from it. Not at all. But it framed the way that you framed it, Professor Meat, in terms of like, yes, I am for the free exchange of ideas.
Disagree with in particular?
I am for the free exchange of ideas, absolutely, or the marketplace of ideas, because it usually doesn't come at a cost of someone until intellectual property rights come into play in a capitalistic system. That's why I'm for pretty much abolishing all intellectual property rights.
But when I try to bring up the harms of a potentially communist society as an alternative, your reason for there not being the harms that are perhaps even greater than that of a capitalistic society, your justification for that being the case is that if under your society you will have changed people's values in such a way that there will not be a demand for capitalistic structures. But that's my point. So then if that is the case, then it seems like the only substantiation you've offered me is that you want people to have the same values as you when it comes to community or something and capitalism. But that's not an argument.
So, Corey, if we could use capitalism to make everyone vegan, would you prefer it over communism where we can't?
It depends on which, I can't imagine a way through.
I'm just saying. I guess I'm asking this kind of silly question to.
Oh no! Like, do the ends justify the means?
Is more important. Like, is the value you value not eating meat at higher than valuing the economic system? Like, which one supersedes the other is all my question.
Well, I don't know if this will fully answer your question, but I don't think it's any surprise that capitalist societies tend to have increasing meat consumption, or that when as countries get more developed or adopt more capitalistic economies, that tends to drive up meat consumption at the cost of environmental degradation, not to mention the animals as well. And it fosters like everyone's against factory farming, okay, and everyone says, yeah, factory farming should be abolished, but there's a reason why this system was implemented, right? Because to address the demands that people are making for whatever.
But I thought they only demanded it because they were trained to demand it. I thought they were only demanded it because of ads and things promoting carnivorous behaviors and things like that. I thought that was your answer you gave to me why I like McDonald's.
Yeah, that is.
But I think it's the opposite here. I think it's the opposite. It's because I and people like me like to eat meat that the market has seen, oh, wow, okay, people want this, let's provide it. And capitalism just tends to provide people's wants and needs better. It just does. This causes problems, as you have rightly pointed out, but it just meets the needs better. More efficiently. I'll use Cricket's word. More efficiently. Let's say that.
I mean, yes. If there's enough demand there for a particular consumer good, I can fully concede that yes, so a market economy will address the supply or the need or the demand. Like, absolutely.
Cool.
But if the only way we can achieve communism is by having capitalism just function, but everyone through capitalism wanting communism at the same time, then like what are you even describing other than a utopia where everyone just wants the same thing? That's my point. Because when I ask you for when I bring up all the problems with trying to institute communism, you just describe a capitalist society where all the markets are open and everyone can do whatever they want, but they just all want communism at the same time. Or they all have an ideology that you say a value system that you say will make them all want essentially agree to communism all at the same time, and it will just function through free markets. But that's just capitalism where people want more socialist things, and they all have the same ideology. Like I can't differentiate these two things from what you're saying.
Okay, well, again,
And please don't tell me it's because I have a deeply ingrained capitalist framework that prevents me from seeing the quality of your argument, because I can say just the same thing about you having some deeply ingrained framework about veganism or neo-primitivism or communism or whatever. But word
sure. Although I think I think it's fair to say you'd have a harder time, demonstrating how I've internalized that message, given generally what's portrayed in media and society at large.
I think
but
if I went on a panel about it and got you to say everything that you said on this panel, I would have thought I did a pretty good job.
But what I would say is, well, at least based off of what I heard, and I might be misunderstanding you, is like you seem to be under the impression that that I think a utopia is my ultimate
let me
end
be
goal.
clear. Yeah. So I have no idea what you think. But that is because I think that your arguments are so like they're nonsensical. So I don't propose to have any idea what you think, basically.
Okay, fine, that's fair. So again, from what I heard, it seems like you think that I think that I'm trying to achieve this utopia, and it's through sort of a some sort of deprogramming or not internalizing the message. That's why I think I started off the argument or the panel like saying like it's diametrically opposed to human nature, because human nature is cooperative. It's not about rational self-interest. It's not about exploitation.
Human nature is both communal and individualistic.
Yes,
I think you
that's
can
the
ask
right
any
answer.
psychologist about that. That is absolutely two fundamental constituents of what determines the well-being for a human.
Yeah, but so yeah, and that's a fair point. Obviously, I'm not saying I'm also not for the abolition of all individuals. I'm obviously never frame it that way.
But there is value in an individualist value system.
But when it comes to the distribution of resources, the distribution of consumer goods and products, then yes, mutual cooperation and the equal distribution of those goods, and a sense, like again, we have a sense of fairness for a reason. And children have children as young as one have a sense of fairness for a reason.
Part of that
What
sense
if I
of
told
fairness,
you
just
that-
real quickly, part of that sense of fairness is that the harder you work, the more you get from it. And I recognize that that's not how the case. Meritocracy has been we have failed at meritocracy in many instances throughout America. But the fundamental idea of if you work harder, you'll get more than the other person is a fair value. It's a fundamental sense of fairness that even children understand.
Yeah, and this is why, like, do you think actually capitalism rewards all hard work? Do you think that's why
It
deaths
should,
of despair?
but it does not. Obviously, again, we've pointed out that, and I agree with you 100%. Capitalism has its issues, it has its problems. It's just again, I would like to repeat, the best of all the options available.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there any system that rewards hard work adequately?
Also think it might be the case that, as far as we could tell, again, capitalist societies might be the best at distributing resources across a population, especially because they tend to also be the best at making those resources in abundance.
I agree. It's good at funneling resources in a particular direction, typically unidirectional or at the extremes.
Do you think there might be a financial incentive to disperse the sale of products to as many people as possible?
Sorry, say that again.
Do you think there might be a financial incentive that arises from the incentive, to a financial incentive that exists for people to produce and sell their products to as many people as possible across the population? Sounds like a good justification for capitalism to some extent, fulfilling like product dissemination and supply chains that you're talking about.
I agree. There is I would agree that there exists a financial incentive. But I've never made the argument that there should be a financial incentive or that there has to be
from that financial incentive.
So may I pose the question? Like, I don't know if anybody checked the link that I put in the chat of the scientific information in terms of materialistic values, and can we all agree that there's at least some association between self-worth and status and materialistic values, or is this?
I do.
Now, did anybody know this beforehand?
Yes.
But even in the data that you've indicated, it's not like a one-to-one like total causation.
But so
So
Professor
it
Mead,
doesn't actually prove your
can
argument.
I ask you the question? Were you aware of this association beforehand?
Not explicitly, probably.
Okay,
Probably
so
not. I didn't have it at the forefront of my knowledge. But now
Right.
that I've seen it, it doesn't actually prove any arguments.
well, the argument that I made that materialistic values are associated with contingent self-worth, or typically
That is a true statement, but it doesn't prove any argument that I think is relevant. To
no,
the
but
conversation.
that's not the point that I'm making. But this is new information to you, correct? That association exists.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I don't want to say I've never seen something like this before because I look at a lot of psychology stuff and forget just as much psychology stuff. 'Cause it's
I
one
look at
my
a lot of
primary subjects
psychology
interest.
stuff too.
So then you know what I mean then, yeah.
Yeah. So, given that this is, well, I think it's fair to say, but maybe I'm wrong, that given that this is new information and this seems to be a foreign concept to some people here, that, oh, materialistic values are associated with other things and other behaviors, maybe there's something else you don't know about consumerism, about materialistic values.
That's a leap.
That-
You cannot
yeah.
say one from the other.
Yeah,
You can't say one
did you know
derives from the
before?
other.
Did you know beforehand that vegans and vegetarians score higher on empathy when
I've
they're
talked to lots of vegans and they always
We
bring this
should-
fucking
hold on,
up.
this
So
is-
yes,
this
I
doesn't
have been
mean-
told this before.
Do you
There's all
have
sorts of
brain
random
do you have
things
brain
that could be
scans,
associated with
fMRI
empathy.
data to show that?
Hey, guess what? You know what data is, and I can try to find it if you dispute it. But maybe you know this since we both look at a lot of psychology stuff. Having too severe of a score in empathetic traits can actually decrease your overall well-being as an individual.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
aware of that research. I'm not.
So therefore, it's probably useless for us to describe some kind of value structure to like being empathetic versus not empathetic, and any traits that might correlate with those humanitarian traits.
And
Like,
again, it's not like carnivores or omnivores, let's call us. It's not like us omnivores cannot be empathetic just as much, right? Like
Again, I'm not saying that this is where it's a spectrum. That's why
so
I said
is it because they're empathetic they choose veganism, or do they choose vegan, or does veganism make them empathetic?
that is an excellent question, Wick. Absolutely. It's a chicken and egg in terms of like, is it as a result of greater empathy that results in people changing their diet, or as a result of changing their diet?
I would stipulate and probably agree with you that if you are empathetic, you are more likely to be a vegan. I would agree with that.
Are
Fair
we
enough.
entertaining the possibility that becoming a vegan makes you more empathetic?
No, I reject that wholesale.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, I reject that wholesale. But the other thing, where if you have a greater degree of empathy, you might be more inclined to go with veganism. Fair, but I don't think that proves what you think it proves. Does that make sense?
No. Yeah, I'm just saying like this seems to be new information. The same thing in terms of like on the political left and on the political right. Who do you think tends to score more on the empathy scale or on the spectrum? Or if someone identifies as a bigot or a racist, where
us to have veganism like as a staple of our economic system.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in terms of the information provided, in terms of we're obviously working with different information. Where again, it didn't seem. You don't think materialistic values are relevant?
I don't think it's relevant to draw a correlation between like well-being or empathy to certain other like traits of an individual, and then use that as an argument for like an actual like value statement that you're making about those people, or about veganism, or about some underlying ethical framework or anything like that.
I can tie it to well-being, absolutely, because again, those who espouse materialistic.
We've already agreed that in a certain sense we can tie empathy to lack of well-being just as much as I can fucking attribute your loose correlation, because it's not a causative correlation. Not one-to-one.
I use that as an example of just new information that you may not have.
If it's irrelevant to the conversation, the fact that you provided me new information is not. It doesn't matter. Guess what? I'm going to Google the number of McDonald's that are in China, and then I can present that as new information. Now, is that relevant? Who could say? I don't know. Maybe we can discuss it on the panel, but it's definitely new information. We can all agree to that.
Yeah, that's why I brought it back to materialistic values and its association with capitalistic economies.
Our underlying framework.
And that's why I said the minimum behavior that one needs to engage in to perpetuate a capitalistic structure or society in terms of consumerism and basically again materialistic values. Like we need to consume in a capitalistic society to perpetuate capitalism, and that's why again you have aggressive marketing campaigns. That's why you typically have exploitation. This is what drives the race to the bottom.
If
I
you
reject
define a
this.
capitalistic
No.
society as one that is exclusive to other
Just real
systems,
quick.
then there's no such thing as a capitalistic society.
Just one quick, like, consumption does not necessarily lead to exploitation. You can be a consumer and not be exploited. You can also be a consumer and not exploit others. These are not connected. They are not necessary for one for another. You can have a capitalistic system that exploits more, and you can have a capitalistic system that minimizes exploitation. Both will work. I would argue that I would like to move to a capitalistic system that minimizes to as much as possible exploitation. I do not think any system that we have is going to eliminate exploitation, primarily because I believe exploitation is a fundamental thing in human nature that at scale just happens. It's bad, but it
Okay.
happens.
So when a company is exploiting its workers, do you praise them?
No, of course not.
Why? Why?
Because they're hurting people and taking advantage.
Does anybody praise a company when it's exploiting its workers, or
No, I
when
lecture them
they're
about veganism. That usually helps.
Do you think we're living in a capitalistic society right now, Corey?
Well, I'm not gonna. Again, the binary. I would absolutely say more capitalistic for sure on the spectrum.
So in that, but the reason I ask is because when you ask the question of how capitalistic, because I think it's a relevant question, how capitalistic or socialist or whatever do we have to be before we are substantiating a capitalistic system? That's my problem with the definition. I would not present it as a binary. That's my entire point of contention, and to try to attribute some type of value because we are a capitalist society versus some other system, trying to use that as the binary is not a useful descriptor of what is going on in reality.
Well, so I don't disagree with everything that you said, because there are people who would make the argument that the U.S. is not capitalistic. I think Fabian Liberty Scott would absolutely say that the U.S. is not capitalistic.
He says
right?
a lot of dumb shit, though, right? Like,
somewhat capitalistic,
and yet
but it's
him
not
and I
capitalistic at the exclusion
are
of
on the
other
same
systems.
page when it comes to intellectual property. That they are for the abolition of intellectual property rights.
Corey, can I ask you? You said earlier that you chose communism because you perceived the prompt of this panel to be a dichotomy, and you chose it specifically because you were rejecting capitalism and thought it was the better alternative.
Absolutely, yes.
If you were not restricted to that dichotomy, would you still call yourself a communist, or would you go with some different description of the system that you favor?
Yeah, I would put myself more in the socialist, communist end of the spectrum. But again, there are people who would make the argument, like Fabian Liberty Scott, that socialism is explicitly not capitalistic, right? Where that's why I'm not into this black and white thinking. I'm just it's either communism or nothing. I'm open to other alternatives. But some people make the argument that socialism is so much of a perversion of capitalism that it's not capitalistic, right?
No one's making that here, I don't think. Are we? Is anyone saying that here?
No.
Throughout the conversation, I mean, if we can all agree that these terms are useless to advocate for at the exclusion of other things, then and more specifically, if we're going to say that advocating for communism at the exclusion of capitalism in any way makes sense, if we're going to say that doesn't actually make sense, then yeah, I would agree. And I'm glad that we finally all agreed with my proposition that I laid out at the beginning of the panel that I've been arguing against this whole time, because most of this contention was reliant specifically upon the premises that the underlying values and the ideas of communism are fundamentally exclusive to capitalism, and that there was no way to advocate for capitalism without advocating for the exclusion of capitalism. Those ideas are the ones that I would disagree with, and those are the things that it sounds like all of a sudden everyone in here agrees.
I mean, all of a sudden, most of us were on your side from the beginning.
I think I said at the beginning that I can envision a highly regulated version of capitalism that's so perverse that some people make the. I'm pretty sure I said that near the beginning. Where it just becomes so perverted that it no longer resembles, in some people's eyes, capitalism, right? I'm just saying, presented with that binary, yes, absolutely, I would choose communism over capitalism.
So then, can you, just to make sure I'm understanding, is communism to you basically just like an ideology? Like it's just some type of loose, I don't want to say loose to disparaging, but some type of just underlying ideology or sets of values? Is that sort of how you're defining communism here?
Generally speaking, yes, without getting into the nitty-gritty details of what exactly is a communist state. And everything.
Because I'm just trying to be clear. If you're basically saying that that the benefit of communism is basically that if you're basically defining communism as like equating advocating for communism with advocating for like less materialistic values just from where we are now, sure, then I guess I'm a filthy communist. I'll admit to that. But I don't think that that's the argument you're making. Maybe it is, but if it is the argument, I don't think it's what most of us are talking about when we talk about communist economics.
Yeah, if you just want an economy that's more informed by communal values and less informed by materialistic values compared to the present day United States, then I'm absolutely on board with that. But I don't think that makes me a communist.
Yeah, that's fair.
So okay, this was a weird conversation. So thanks all. To my audience, we're going to continue on with our open walk on panel wrap this, so stick around. We have more content for you. Yeah, more content for you, so stick around for that. Oh, Tiberius, thank you for the kind raid. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, stick around for that. I'm just going to give an outro to all these kind individuals. If you've been enjoying this content or tolerating it one way or the other, be so kind, hit that follow button in case you haven't done so already. And make sure the notification bell is on so you know I'm going live. It is 7 nights a week. We're always providing you content here or on YouTube. Speaking of that, we got social media. Hit us up on Twitter where I post updates as to what's going on. Discord, heart and soul of the community. Everything happens in that Discord. Be a part of our Discord. Jump on in. And of course, YouTube is where you'll find the VODs. If you missed anything, like, comment, and subscribe. And consider becoming a YouTube member, supporting us that way by hitting that join button. Okay, I'm going to give an outro to all these people, but remember, we still have more content coming your way. So, Wick, thank you for stopping by, being a part of this. As always, you're a great guest to have. We very much appreciate you. So, Wick, tell the world where they can find you.
So you can find me at twitch.tv/Death of Certainty, Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. You can also find me often on here on PrimeCayes, who invites me on these closed panels, and I show up to the open panels on occasion. We do a more conversational format for the most part on my show. We talk about concepts rather than debate them most of the time, but we do have an exception coming up on Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Speaking of Fabian Liberty Scott and Professor Meat, these two individuals will be going head-to-head in a debate over freedom and the role of government. And it should be interesting. Check it out, twitch.tv/Death of Certainty. Give me a follow. And otherwise, also give Prime a follow because he's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seriously, that's very kind. LJ Steele, thank you for the sub. I must have missed it previously. And then Desperado Sensei, thank you for resubbing for 4 months. We get one more person. Well, there's no way it's gonna make it with that hype trans. But still, how about the we did Soyatl, thank you for the 100 bits. I think that starts a hype train here. Thank you. Help us out. 4 minutes left on the clock. Okay, next, Professor Meat. Thank you for coming through and being a good sport, putting a good fight. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Professor_Meat on Twitch. And I also want to say thank you so much for having me, Prime. I appreciate it. I enjoyed being here. I love doing this stuff. Thank all of you guys for the conversation, even you, Corey. I know we got a little heated, but I appreciate it nonetheless. I appreciate you sticking with me.
Likewise.
Thank you very much. You can find me at Professor_Meat on YouTube. It's a little bit of a wasteland right now, but we're going to get it up and running. Don't worry. I'll become a real quote-unquote professional streamer here soon. We like to be the sword and shield of the base and the righteous over on my platform. And basically, our underlying value system is truth. I don't know whether or not that's capitalist or communist, but hopefully somewhere in between. Thanks for having me. I think that just to give my closing little position, I think at the beginning of this I said that I think communism is basically more of an ideology or a badge of honor than anything else, or something equivalent. And I think that if that's your definition, that's fair. But I think that it technically agrees with me, which is all that's important.
Thank you so much. And guys, how about the hype train? Sub to the channel, give bits or give subs. That's how we keep this around. If you like this content, if you like having this space open, then help us out. Help us get to a level 2 hype train. Do you have any more heroes in chat? Thank you, Displaced Gamer and Tones Girl. for being so kind as to gift 100 bits each. But can we get some more help? We have 43% done, 57% left. 3 minutes on the clock. Can we make it to level 2 Hype Train? Help us out if you can. Subs to the channel, gift bits, or give sub. Get our emotes, get ad-free viewing. Ad-free viewing. You'll get that. Oh, well, thank you, Desperado Sensei, who's been continuously kind, for gifting 5 subs to the community. Hooray, Desperado. I think I put you as number 1 in terms of our sub donors this month. Thank you, Desperado Sensei, for your kindness and for resubbing previously. All right, we'll get back to that in a second. Cricket Style, Jay, thank you. This is your first time coming through. Much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did, yeah, and thank you for hosting this. I always enjoy the discussions, and I enjoy your community, and I'm glad to see the command economy at work generating those subs. And anyway, yeah, I'm Cricket J on Twitch and Discord. I do stream occasionally, but mostly I'm just a rando who hangs around other people's communities, and it's been a fun time, and see you around.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have the beautiful, the gorgeous LSP. LSP, thank you for stopping by. I always try to drag this guy in to a conversation, but because I just enjoy arguing against him. He's a lot of fun. LSP, tell a little bit about yourself.
I'm LSP, but nobody cares. My homeboy Jangles Science Lad did a debate with Destiny recently. It was about the trans sports thing. I think he did a really good job. I think you guys should go watch that, check that out. Give him a little bit of love and a little bit of support because he's a real fighter. Yeah, and thanks Prime. So give Prime money, please, because he's buying me a pizza, and so I'll feel less guilty. Give him money. So can you just throw a buck his way?
Thank you for the kindness. All right, and last but not least, we have Corey, who took quite a bit of a beating here, but did it in a great, spectacular fashion. Seriously, I appreciate you coming through and sharing your thoughts and opinions. So Corey, tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Corey Campbell. You could find me at Corey Campbell 84. I tend to approach everything from a scientific perspective, and I can generally always back up my claims, despite what was shown here, I guess, perhaps. I want to thank you, Prime, for having me on. Much appreciated. Super grateful. Thank you, Wick, Professor Meat, Cricket Style, and well, I just see A27L, but much appreciated. And yeah, super grateful.
Okay, all right. We will continue. What'd you say?
Who the fuck is A27L?
Yeah, no fucking clue.
Isn't that what's on the screen in stream?
Probably someone with nothing to say that doesn't matter,
I agree 100%.
Well, fucking nobody. All right, anyway, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Much appreciated, right? Anyone here on this panel can join us for Open Walk On panel coming up next. But if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion for my community. I know they appreciate just as I do. Have a good one. Bye.